right, welcome back. It is still June 17th, 2025. We are back in our regular school committee meeting agenda. And the next item on the agenda are we have, let's see, who do we have here with us tonight? We have from the Arlington Education Association, we have Ms. Keys with us this evening. We have from the Arlington High School, we have Zach and Sophia with us this evening. We're going to hear from them momentarily. And then on the committee remotely, we have Ms. Gittleson and Dr. Allison Ampe, and we don't have Dr. Ford Walker with us this evening. From the Arlington High School, student representatives, it is your moment. What do you have to share with us tonight? I want to hear about Frisbees.
Yeah, first up, school obviously is ending. We had our last day of normal school yesterday, and now it's just final periods. Second, the Arlington Frisbee team went to nationals this weekend in Lehigh, Pennsylvania, and we took home first place. It was the first time Massachusetts team has ever won, and the Pumas team, which is the Arlington High School Frisbee team, which I'm going to be captain of next year, started 10 years ago and is still a club at AHS. And then the student council is planning start of year events for the start of next year. We're gonna have a welcome block party to include all the freshmen and get the school spirit riled up.
We had our Bejazzled concert over the weekend. I wasn't able to attend, but I heard it was really good. We have our freshman first year advantage on Monday where they'll be taking tours of the school, and we'll have a student council panel for them. And then this was a bit ago, but the graduation was moved indoors, and I still think it was very successful and very well thought out for being very last minute. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Questions, comments from the committee? Thank you for being here with us on this sort of very last meeting. So the next item on our agenda is public comment. We have nobody who signed up in advance for public comment and nobody here with us tonight. So the next item on our agenda is a vote to approve the AEA Unit D contract with our paraprofessional unit. Dr. Homan, I think you're going to start us off on this.
Yes, I am. So we are very pleased to bring to you tonight collaboratively arrived at contract that we have worked on with our colleagues in Unit D, which is our paraprofessional unit. I would like to thank our paraprofessionals who really make our schools run and work for all kids. They do a lot of the work to make sure that inclusion is possible, that our students have any additional support that they need to support our teachers, and are really critical to the work of the organization. So I want to thank them and the bargaining team in particular for their continued collaboration with the district and their commitment to our students in both policy, like contracts like this, and in our collective practice. Our educators, all of the employees in all of our bargaining units always bring us proposals that are very thoughtful and have the kids at the center of what they're proposing, and that is something that I do not take for granted and that I think we all really appreciate. So this contract continues our commitment to competitive salaries and adds a step for our educators so that they can continue to have some upward mobility when it comes to compensation. It has very competitive benefits, including paid parental leave for our paraprofessionals. I think we're a leader in the state in this area, and we're very proud to be able to offer this to our employees. We have smoothed out steps, which provides for some financial predictability moving forward so that we don't have big step jumps that have a different percentage to them, and the staff very much understood why that was important as we move forward with the salaries that we've been working on over the last few years. It includes an attendance incentive to earn additional personal time and commitments to shadow days for new employees, which will improve both their training and hopefully retention if they feel like they've been able to connect with somebody and understand the role a little bit in their first couple days on the job. and commitments to continue opportunities for paraprofessionals to work towards licensure that have proven popular over the last couple of years. So we offer this up as a really excellent agreement and one that furthers our priorities laid out in the strategic plan, and with a lot of gratitude for to the bargaining team across the board for their collaborative approach to this process and for arriving at this agreement.
Great. Mr. Schlickman.
It was a very cooperative bargaining environment. I'm very grateful that we have a great relationship with AEA and our paras. With that, I move to approve the MOA and authorize the chair to sign any required documents on our behalf.
Second?
Any discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Exton?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes.
And I am also yes. That is a 7-0 vote. Thank you so much. Good news. Great. The next item on our agenda.
Does the AEA
Oh, please.
reference-
Yes, bring it. No.
I just want to say thank you to the district for this great contract. This is our second successor para contract in Arlington. The paraprofessionals only joined the union in 2018. And I am so pleased to see how the district commitment to belonging has really been reflected in these contracts, that we are providing very, very similar benefits for all of our employees in this district, whether you are a first-year teaching assistant or a 12th or 20th year teacher. You are valued by this district from these contracts, and we really appreciate that. I want to take a minute to thank the district members of the team and the AEA members, Jenna Medeiros, our second vice president, Emo Oro, who is an SSP at Pierce, Susan Suarez, who is an special education TA at Stratton, Christina Delaney, who is a kindergarten TA at Pierce, Irina Pansavoy, who is an SSP with the Compass program at the Audison, and Leslie Lewis, who is an SSP with the Harbor program at the high school. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. All right. The next item is a vote to approve the local 680 bus contract that was negotiated last week. Mr. Spiegel, do you want to get us into that?
So I will also just reiterate, this was for the bus drivers. We had a very collaborative negotiation. We had a couple sessions. Our bus drivers in Arlington do, obviously, they take our students to and from school. They do a lot of field trips, especially this time of year. They are full-time employees. They also drive our athletic teams to and from away games and meets, and they also work with our food service department and mail department to get things between our schools. So we rely on them all day, every day for many different things, and we have long-term employees in our bus unit, and so we believe this contract values them as well. It does give them cost of living increases, and it also adds steps in the second and third year to recognize our long-term employees who've been here for quite a while, and we value them. So I think it's a fair contract, and it was a successful negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegel. Mr. Schlickman.
It was obvious through the negotiations that the bus operators really care about the district, really care about doing a good job for us, really care about our kids, and we worked through a couple of items on here and had an open discussion of how we can improve their work days as well on things that don't necessarily fall within the contract, but things that we're listening to. With that, I move that we approve the memorandum of agreement and authorize the chair to sign any necessary documentation on their behalf.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Ms. Exton?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes.
And I am also yes. That is a 7-0 vote. It's very nice to come here at, the waning days of the school year and the end of June to do both of these contracts. Strong unions make strong school systems. So we are lucky to be able to do this. The next item on our agenda is a field trip discussion and a possible approval for a trip to Taiwan in 2026 on Zoom. We have Arlington High School educator Jiawei Chow with us, and we also had Dr. Janger earlier. I'm sure he's around
Coming back,
too,
yeah.
if folks have
Sure.
specific questions around the implications for the high school. So Ms. Chow, do you want to go ahead?
All right, so we're gonna we're planning a trip next year during spring break, during April break for 9 days. It's starting on Friday, so students might miss 1 day on Friday. And we're gonna come back on Saturday, so students have 1 day to relax before the school start. So it's 9 day trip with 2 homestay. So last year we went to Taiwan and students had such a wonderful experience, and I think it's really benefit for our students. Hope it can get approval.
Great, thank you so much. Discussion from the committee around this trip? Ms. Exton?
Thank you. This might be more for Dr. Jenger, but I looked through the documents here and I didn't see it, although I will say that Real Asia has a lot of information about the training for their staff, which was really impressive. But my question is, what are the sort of criteria or accommodations to ensure that any student who wants to go on this trip, that it's accessible for them? And normally we do ask about finances. That's not really what I mean. I more mean just making sure that any student who's in this course that is eligible for this trip is able to go on the trip.
So basically,
Yeah.
sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
The question for me, Joey. But then I'll let you answer. I think there's a general question, and then Joey can answer specifically. We make every effort to make reasonable accommodations for students. So, we've had students with any number of disabilities, whether some students have been diabetic, some students have had neurological issues. There have been students from a wide range of programs. If students are able to safely participate and we can make reasonable accommodations, we do so. One of the sort of challenging criteria of these trips is they're enrichment trips. They're paid for entirely by families. And so we have generally been able to work within that context. I mean, our nurses have monitored students from home and other things when students have had to go. So we make every effort to make reasonable accommodations to let students go on these trips, understanding that at the same time, the trips are demanding, right? Just in the same way that we wouldn't have a student who's just had a concussion play in a hockey game because that would be unsafe. If there is a serious medical issue, we will usually have a conversation with a healthcare provider to find out what accommodations are necessary and whether they feel that the student can safely participate.
Thank you.
I don't know, Joey, whether there's anything you can say about this trip.
Yeah, and from last year's experiences, and before the trip, I always communicate with the nurse to ensure everything's fine. And also, we have travel medical plan. So for that, and I feel like I feel comfortable with to taking students with me.
Can I add to this a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
There is a delay to getting a few things up on the website so that people can review them. That is my fault because I have everything from Dr. Jenger and haven't put it on a page with the comms department yet. But there's a process also that the high school follows to review the eligibility of each student at several checkpoints on the way to the trip, so that if something flags for eligibility, we communicate that. And that's like, we will make reasonable accommodations. Sometimes and then sometimes we'll talk to folks, the family or the, a 5014, for example, if there is one, about what reasonable accommodation means for a trip of this nature. So some different trips have different demands attached to them, and whether or not what's articulated in a plan, if there is one, sometimes you need accommodations, it doesn't necessarily need a 504 plan, it doesn't necessarily need an IEP attached to it. But if it has that, we'll follow the plan. If that plan doesn't match up with the demands of the trip, because that plan is designed for school, then that's a conversation with the family. So they have this laid out in procedural guidelines for the teachers who run the trips to do these checks with the high school administration, and that's built into their procedures for anybody who's going to organize a trip that I'll have as part of sort of the comprehensive, here's our documentation for trips, international and domestic, and the approach we take across the school system. And I have all of that. It just I haven't made it public yet. But I'm happy to send it ahead of time if you're interested in looking at it.
And can I jump in one more time?
Yeah, please.
So procedurally, right, there are criteria for the trip, right? So often students are signing up for this trip a year ahead of time. The concerns that will become more of a concern is if when the trip is leaving, you have a health situation which is going to make it unsafe for you to participate, or whether a student is in disciplinary challenges that would put them on social probation for other activities, or whether there's academic eligibility issues. So at the initial sign up for the trip, we want to make sure that anyone who thinks there might be any possibility that that's going to be an issue a year from now has already had a conversation with us. But we don't necessarily know what that's going to be. So often that's really helpful, right? Because you can have a conversation a year in advance about what's going to happen, and we can plan for that. We then run that list 60 days before the trip, and then 30 days before the trip. The nurses and the dean identify anyone around who has any concerns, and we have a conversation with the family depending on what the concern is, and work very hard to make sure that we're able to, one, have the student be safe, we have the student be eligible to the family.
Mr. Schlickman?
Before I make a motion to approve the trip, I just want to say that last April, Rieko and I were in Japan, and it turns out the cheapest way to get from Sapporo to Boston was to fly through Taipei. So we had a 26-hour layover and spent a day in Taipei, and it was extraordinary. I'm just so thrilled to be able to send some students over there to see this amazing place. So I move approval of the trip.
Second.
All right, further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote, Ms. Sorry.
Dr. Al-Sampi's waiting.
Dr. Al-Sampi, sorry.
Okay. So I support the idea of this trip. I'm also feeling just concerned about the state of the world, and I wonder how we make assessments of the political situation and safety at the time of the trip.
So
Dr. Schenker?
in what I call my paranoia checklist, which is 3 pages long, one of the things that we do at the 60-day mark and the 30-day mark is review travel advisories and travel concerns related to the location that they're going to see whether there's a need to make any accommodation. And then sometimes we have had trips canceled because of COVID and postponed to another year. And we have had trips had to reroute with the travel, because there was area in which we were going. So that's one of the things we started with.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say this also, one of the things that has changed since COVID, so there are 2 levels of travel insurance. There's sort of the general travel insurance, and then there's cancellation insurance. It used to be that we made those levels of insurance optional for parents. We now require that the general travel insurance, which will cover many disruptions like how travel is a required part of the trip. That's made available to everybody.
May I say something? May?
Yes, please.
All right. So I believe in American or U.S. embassy's website, they always mark countries with the danger level 3. So for Real Asia, my travel company, they always go to the website to check if the country is in level 3 or even level 2. And I think I'm gonna be very cautious of that.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Schlickman?
Just as a follow-up, knowing the world situation, I am glad to hear that you're doing the travel insurance for this trip. That's one of those destinations where it's peaceful and tranquil and happy, but you never can tell what you're going to encounter a year from now. But I just, again, I thought that Taipei was wonderful. I'm glad we're able to do this.
Anybody else? Seeing none, roll call vote, Ms. Exton?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes.
And I am also yes. That's a 7-0 vote. The next item on our agenda is the first read of the Arlington High School Student Handbook. Thank you to Dr. Janger, his team, Dr. Homan for getting us another version of this for tonight's meeting. The intention here is Dr. Janger is with us tonight. Dr. Homan is here. Obviously, we are going to go through any questions or feedback that folks have on this with the intention for them to bring us back another version of this at a meeting in July, which we will discuss at the end of this meeting, to do a second read and approval. So we received this at least some days ago now. Dr. Janger, do you have anything general that you want to tell us about this? I mean, we do this every year, so is there anything new and special that we should be paying attention to?
I think it is worth noting that I think we've got one, it is a, I don't know another way to describe it other than a Talmudic document, right? It is a document that is layered archaeologically over the time. And every time we go through it, we find phrases or comments or someone says, why is this here? And I'm like, I think that's been there for 100 years and I don't know what it means. And so each time we comb through it, we clean it, try to move it forward. This year, I definitely want to give a shout out to the student council. There's been a student committee that actually did a close read through, and many of the changes in this were a result of their request for us to be more clear about what we wanted students to do as opposed to what they should not do, and to be sort of more positive and clear. So sometimes it actually made it more restrictive, but it's clear for the students to understand what it does. More eyes, the better, because there are so many different threads in this, but we've done a pretty deep read through it at this point, and so I'm hoping that this will help it to be a little bit clearer for everybody.
Great. Questions, comments? Ms. Exton?
So when it had come to us at the last meeting, there was a little conversation about the cell phones and keeping them in the backpacks had been deleted. Can you just talk a little bit about your thinking around that?
Backpacks are back.
Did he brought it back? Okay, never mind.
Backpacks are back. If I gave you the right version, the backpacks are back. Backpacks are back. Dr. Janger?
No, let me look. I'll be honest with you.
They were in one version I saw.
Right, they're in the one I'm looking at, which is the 6th.
Here's what I would say about cell phones. We are reviewing cell phone policy right now. I think there is a consensus towards making it more consistent. But we are waiting to get some feedback from students as well. So there may be a revision to the language. I'm trying to find what it says about cell phones, what you have in there.
It's on page 19 of the version they are looking at, I believe. Nope?
Page 18.
I was looking in the
So the language now is phones must be stored in designated areas away from the student's desk, such as a classroom phone caddy or in a backpack, and should not be taken to the bathroom or hallways during class unless it is an authorized accommodation.
So I think the reason why that is left the way it is, that is a little, I think, clearer than what was there before. But is mainly because I think we may be taking away the backpack option between now and July, but we haven't made a final decision. I think that there is a consensus forming that requiring them to be in a separate caddy is going to be easier and clearer for everybody. But we haven't made a final decision.
I didn't understand.
Yeah.
You faded
So
out.
could you make sure you speak loudly and clearly? Because
Yeah, I'm trying.
Sorry. I'm not sure why. I think it's the sound in here.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Better.
Simple version is, I believe there is a consensus forming that we are going to move away from the backpack option, but that has not been made at this time.
So,
Yeah,
So
Ms.
that-
can you just, I realize you haven't made the decision yet, but can you share some of the thinking around why that would be?
So the feedback that we have gotten from schools, in general is that having the more restrictive cell phone policy we've had this year has improved classroom environment, reduced conflict around cell phones, made students more attentive. And nonetheless, in some settings where teachers have found it harder to enforce, there's been a general agreement that having it be more consistent in all classrooms will make it easier for the classrooms where it is harder. And also a little bit less just of a power struggle. We've also gotten feedback from parents. Again, there's a survey that will be going out to parents to get more collective feedback. But the feedback that we've gotten from parents, which is consistent with a lot of the research, is that as much as we can reduce cell phones in classroom environments, the better the environment's going to be. So it's really the balance in high school is coming up with an enforceable policy that doesn't lead to unnecessary conflict and at the same time has a positive impact. If you look at the research is that it's a lot harder to enforce in a high school environment. So finding the sweet spot of one that makes it better without simply leading you to something that's unenforceable is what we're looking for.
I'm not fully understanding why that makes one, the caddy versus a backpack better. I realize this is not a conversation specifically about cell phones, so I'm gonna let it go and just make a recommendation that we as a subcommittee, as a committee next year, have a broader conversation about cell phones.
And we will be updating our cell phone policy probably before your meeting, and it may require an edit, so we will have a conversation about it at that time.
So because Ms. Exton brought it up, but I agree with it. So the challenge here, and this is what I hear from my students, is that as all teachers are not a monolith anywhere, there are teachers who have very different feelings about cell phones. And there are some who are not interested in, they're fine with it being in a backpack. They're not going to force kids to put it in a caddy. And it doesn't matter what the policy says or what, I can't imagine that we are going to direct teachers to have kids put their phones in a caddy at the beginning of every period. So I guess I just don't understand. I can understand why the people who want the cell phones in the caddies want everybody to be told to put the cell phones in the caddies. But I just don't know that it just doesn't seem implementable or realistic that that's actually going to be how it is. So I guess I'm curious what the conversations have been around that.
So this recommendation is largely coming to us from the teachers. This is coming to us from the faculty senate. And to be honest, even the policy that we have this past year was really developed in concert with the faculty senate. It did not come from administration. And what we explained to the staff was that if we are agreeing that this is the policy we are putting in place, we are also agreeing that administrators will be holding you accountable for that policy. And so that's the conversation we're having now. At think that what is for the most part happening is in the backpack, right? When it's in a backpack, I think this gets into the weeds and it will take feedback from the teachers. But when it is in it, there are many teachers, and when I go around right now, I see moderate implementation of the policy, but I see significantly less disruption from phones. So if it's in a backpack, I also then have to have that backpack away from the desk. Putting the backpack away from the desk, many people feel is more complicated. They end up being in a place where they're now fighting with kids about where their backpacks are. If we have a consistent practice that you put the thing in one place away from the desk, and teachers take attendance using that, for example, which is a pretty common practice, then you collect all the phones. Can kids thwart that if they want to? Yes, but the vast majority of our students are not really looking to thwart our policies. If our expectations are clear and they're skill-based and we're constructive about the way we implement them, we generally find that students find a way to make them work, and the student staff does. So that's a conversation about how much we will restrict it. But right now, we're not there yet. We're still getting some more feedback, and we will run draft policy by the staff as a whole. We ran the current draft policy by the staff as a whole, got overwhelming positive support in surveys from the staff about putting it in place, modified it slightly based on their feedback. So we'll do that again.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, what I can tell you is that at Arlington High School in September of 2024, and I appreciate that things may be different now, and they may feel differently in September 2025, but there were multiple teachers who told kids the first week of school, I don't want to deal with the cell phone policy. I don't care where your phone is. Just put it away. Let's get on with it. Let's do what we need to do. That's very confusing for kids if then there are serious repercussions for those same students 10 minutes later in a different class.
Right, but there's
So-
never been serious repercussions for cell phones. The cell phone policy is you're reminded of the expectations, and expectations can be slightly different in classes, that each teacher establishes their routines, and that then if they're violated, you review it, you take it and you bring it to the front of class. There have been only a handful of cases of student cell phones brought down to the front, probably not as many as there frankly should be, handful of conflicts with students around it, but there's a significant change in cell phone. Sorry, I apologize for interrupting.
Which is great, but it is really confusing for kids to get a message in first period that their teacher is not interested, doesn't want to deal with it, is going to run a class that is, they're like, just put the phone away, I don't want to deal with it. And then to walk down the hall 45 minutes later and have a teacher be like, this has to be in a caddy, this is what we're going to do every single day. That it does cause anxiety for kids who want to follow the rules, they want to meet the expectations, and they're getting really different messaging. Now, it sounds like what you're telling us is that there is more unanimity around this than perhaps there was in September, which is fine, and that would be appropriate to move towards a more restrictive policy. But it is really confusing for kids when people are not on board with doing it. And it's not fair to them, to the kids who want to follow the rules and who want to meet the expectations, to feel that anxiety of being in one place where it doesn't matter where their phone is, or they may even need their phone to authenticate, to log into the College Board website, which they often do if they lose their password, and then to go to another class where it's like rigorously enforced. So I hope that the expectations, I think this is the right way to do it. If this is what depending on what they want, obviously, like, I want to do it. I am really concerned about the inconsistent approach to this. And I think it ultimately is really hard on kids. So I look forward, I do think that if you are going to change, if you're going to look for a change in this, we do need to see it with plenty of notice before, like, if you want to change this in the handbook for next school year, then we need plenty of notice for that before we do a second read on this. Or it needs to stay how it is for the 25, 26 school year, and we can revisit it next spring. Yes. Dr. Jinger.
So I think we agree. And I think the issue, teachers have consistently told us that moving towards greater consistency is their desire. Even many teachers who are not consistently enforcing it. And I think that messaging is going to be important. The only change I believe that would need to be in the handbook is removing the word backpacks. Because a lot of it's going to be more operational and procedural and how that gets explained in expectations to students. And we've done that intentionally because we don't want the handbook to be sort of the overly prescriptive because it makes it harder to refine and to work with the kids around it. And the second thing I will say there will be some inconsistency. Unfortunately or fortunately, the phones are very, very useful educational tools. In our photography classes, kids are going to use their phones. And so expectations about how that's going to happen, for example, or in other classes, but it has to be only for a purpose educationally. They can't just be out in general. And so that's what we're working on, getting that guidance tighter so that for the teachers who were less inclined to do it, they're doing it. And for the teachers who found it harder to do because their colleagues weren't doing it, there's more consistency. So I think we agree.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. That is the reason that another district adopted this policy, was to create consistency so that there wasn't variability between one classroom to the next classroom. This was what the entire school was supposed to be doing, and everybody knew that. The current policy does allow the variability, and I can see some teachers saying, put it in your backpack, I don't know where it is, because that's their choice. But if that's no longer an option, then maybe there would be more consistency. I don't know.
And is this, we don't know, so this is a question for Dr. Holman, is this going to be starting in grade 6, or is this just at age, like if we're just doing phone caddies at AHS, but then there's different rules at different places, then like.
So it should be clear everywhere. So I think if this is, I'm now very interested in what the policy looks like in the now shared handbook between Gibbs and OMS, because that, our goal is to have the same handbook for Gibbs and OMS. And what that looks like. One of the things I was just thinking about too is if we're going to say it has to be in a phone caddy, I fully support this language without the backpack in it, and we need to split the phone caddy because that's a resource and that should be ready to go at the beginning of the year. So we can talk about like having that ready to go, whether or not that approach alleviates any of the challenges that have been encountered at some of the other schools. I haven't had a chance to discuss this at length with the principals at the middle level. And get some of their reflections. I know that the phone being out of sight and or it becomes mine is the rule at the other schools. And I know that sometimes the phone walks out into a space where there might not be an adult watching and it's in the pocket and it might come out, and that there's a way kind of around that leads to inconsistency. So we want to address some of those challenges that have come up. But there was a lot of, like, we implemented a policy that was a lot stricter this year at all of these schools. We've now done it for a year. It's not surprising to me that teachers are making excellent recommendations about what would make this more consistent so that we're not in a position where we're getting compared with one another and we're not in a position where we're making the kids confused. So it's not shocking to me to hear teachers, even those who maybe started the year with, it says, I don't want to see it, so I don't want to see it, and sort of had a little bit more hands-off of an approach, saying, let's make it clear so that we all do the same thing, because we're seeing more and more of that with the educators. So I will definitely circle back with the other principals and make sure that whatever we're doing is consistent with what we do here, even if it's a little bit different, depending on the needs of the building and the age of the kids.
Okay, and I guess just the one thing I would like to consider, I think at the middle grades, and I'm sure there are kids who have their phones out all the time, and there is a subset of kids who put their phone in their backpack at the beginning of the school day when they walk into the building, and they don't take it out of their backpack until they walk out of the building at the end of the day. That backpack is with them at their desk where they are, right? So if we're going to do phone caddies in 6, 7, and 8, right, we're now in a situation where that kid, every time they walk into class, is like, oh, here's my phone. Oh, look at my notifications. Oh, I'm going to put it in the caddy because here I am.
This is why I have the question.
Right, here I am in health class, right, and now I'm going to, now health class is over. Got to remember my phone, right? So that, and again, it makes the phones such a part of every transition if we are going to force the kids to put them in a caddy in every classroom, right? Because they have to remember to pick it up. It's like it creates this relationship with the phone. And I do not doubt that phones are a problem in the middle grades. And I know that there is a not small portion of kids who put that phone in their backpack when they walk in the building, and next time they take it out or think about it is at the end of the school day. So I don't really know how you have that plan in 6, 7, and 8. You do, mandate the caddies in the high school. I would guess there are high school kids who put their phone in their backpack at the beginning of the day and they bring it out at lunchtime. I know there are 2 of them because I cannot get in touch with my children during the school day because they do not know where their phone is, right? It's at the very bottom of their bag, but I get that lots of people have them out. So it does seem, I feel this feels a little rushed to me, to be honest, to get to something by the middle of July. If this is really what the plan is for next school year, I would like to see more engagement sort of 6 through 12 around this. So anyway, I guess we'll come back in July and talk more about it. Mr. Thielman?
So my question was about the process, which is, are we able to hold like a committee meeting in the summer and invite people to come and give input before we take a vote by the full committee? So it might be better to have a subcommittee meeting open to the public. We can have people weigh in.
We can do. We need to meet in July at some point anyway to deal with some budget stuff. And
Yeah, because I think it would be, seems like.
I didn't really know this was coming, to be honest. So I saw the backpack language in the second draft and I was like, all right, so we're not making substantive changes. Now it's sounding like there's pretty significant changes. So yeah.
I would just say, I think we do have time to go through a process, to have a committee meeting, have the committee vote, the whole school committee vote prior to August. Or no, I don't know, or I think we could. But Dr. Holman's not sure.
Well, I think it sounds to me like there's been a lot of discussion about the goal, which is more consistent implementation of whatever the policy is, amongst the folks who have to implement it. That Dr. Jenger is still gathering some of that input. I think you raised some good points about what, implementation of it at the high school level, if it's caddies, means it's coming out and back in frequently throughout the day. We also know that the high school students are in an open campus, and so having a slightly different approach there than we do at the middle level, I am comfortable with, because they're at a different developmental level. I am absolutely open to hearing feedback, and we've implemented, based on feedback from the community, stricter policies this year. What the implementation, we've heard also the feedback that we need that to be consistent. And what I think the educators are working towards now is, what does it look like for that to be made more consistent? What are the issues we've run into this year with the implementation? I think if we could have a process that would allow us to gather from families anything they've seen or noticed that might not be on our radar or heard from kids, we'd love to integrate that in. I don't want us to delay too much being able to implement some handbooks, some language in handbooks parents can sign off on as they sign the back to school update in August. And I think if we delay another round on the other handbooks, which aren't voted by the committee but received, that it's unlikely that those are then ready to go in the back to school update that families sign off on at the beginning of the year. So the timing piece, I'm not sure what we're imagining right now, but I worry about it delaying.
I mean, it's also June 17th, and we're just getting this. This is the first read. It seems like there's some new information coming in, right? So, I mean, it's a pretty significant, the middle school handbooks, we just accept them, right? So they can, I would like to see some sort of conscientious way of thinking about how it seems a little weird. You can have your phone in your backpack at the Audison in 8th grade and you walk into Arlington High School and you gotta put it in and take it out of a caddy 6 times a day. But, if there's some compelling reason to do that, fine. And the middle schools, we don't need to do. We have to approve this handbook, right? So if there's gonna, I mean, it is a significant change to go to a caddying system that is required every period, every day. I guess I'm just not sure, given where we are in, like, given that it's late June at this point, we want this in the packet in August. We don't have any more meetings scheduled. Like, is this really, like, does this really have to be done for next school year? Or is there like a way to have a process next year so that we can come back and actually not do this in sort of a rush? I don't know. I don't know how important it is that we, that the cell phone policy is just caddies. It sounds like that's even still under consideration. I don't know. I can't. So Ms. Keys, and then Dr. Jinger, and then Dr. Allison Ampe.
I was just going to say that if you're talking about changing things over the summer, my understanding of this is coming to you with having been reviewed by the Student Council and the Faculty Senate, which are not going to be able to meet and respond to your questions or potential changes over the summer. And Dr. Jenger can correct me, but if this is coming with the recommendation of the students and the staff in the school, I think it's worth, I mean, if it doesn't work out this year, it can be changed for next year, but I wonder why that's being questioned.
Well, because we've gotten like 4 different versions of the same policy in the last month. So clearly there's some, like, clearly they're doing some, they're doing some thinking around this. So we've seen, we had no backpacks, then we had backpacks, now maybe we're not going back to backpacks. So certainly there have been a variety of different versions that we've seen. Dr. Jenger, and then Dr. Allison Ampe.
So I think in the past we have done, I'm not sure I appreciate that we have moved to this process of trying to approve the handbook in this. We did not do that for many years. We approved it in the summer. It is a lot to go through, and we've been trying to clarify and clean up language. A lot of this has been about clarifying language. And so the issue for me, I think the language in the handbook is really just saying that students should be putting their phone in a designated place. We want to sit down based on the student. We are getting some student feedback now, which is later than we should have. And we are about to ask for some faculty parent feedback before we finalize the guidelines. But I would recommend that in the handbook, you simply say that phones have to be put in a designated place and away from the desk. That has been our policy all along. We're going to look at procedurally how we can do this in a more consistent way so that it's easier for teachers to enforce. That's really what we're looking for. It's not a major change in the policy that we currently have. That's not our intent. Our intent has been the policy that we've had this year, I think, has been relatively successful in creating a more positive environment in the school. People would like to streamline it a little bit so there's more consistency across the classes. That is what we're looking for. I apologize that this language is in there and that it's bounced in and out as we've been trying to get that information. That's our fault in just trying to get this process through. But my recommendation would be to simply say that it has to be in a designated location, so that then we have the opportunity to start the September with the policy that we're going to put in place, which is a shift in practice. It's not a shift in the basic policy. And then we can make adjustments. That would be my recommendation. And I apologize that we're now getting into a big conversation about something which we wanted to sort of take a moment to finish up what we were doing on that.
Great, thank you. That would help me a lot. Like designated area, that seems like our swim lane. Operationally, you guys figure out where that place is.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Dr. Allison Ampe.
Thanks. So first, I'm with Ms. Morgan in terms of being concerned about the caddies mean that the kids have to have the phones in between classes so they can take them out, put them in, and just that's encouraging more interaction with the phones. And I'm concerned about that. But moving on to other topics, first, Dr. Janger, if we have comments, I'm assuming we can just send them to you?
Yep.
Okay, so I have some, I'll send them in, but just a couple broad things. One, the listing of those who we may not exclude in different places, like for clubs or athletics and stuff, is inconsistent. On page 77, it includes gender identity, but most of the others don't include that. And so I think we want to be consistent throughout and inclusive for everyone.
Can you say
And
that again? I want to make sure I understood what you just said.
there, okay, so in a number of places, it talks about, like for athletics, people may not be excluded on basis of sexual orientation, religion, etc. On page 77, it also includes gender identity, but the other ones do not. The other places where it's found multiple places in the handbook. And I just think we should be, one, consistent, and two, I think it should be including gender identity throughout.
Got it. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. And then the second thing is on page 17. It talks about how excessive school absences may also result in the school initiating appropriate legal action when necessary. And I'm just wondering if you can't have some sort of reference to state policies on what's it called, when the kids don't show up.
Yeah, compulsory attendance, chronic absences.
Right. Just because otherwise, I don't know, it's so vague, it sounds threatening, and I'm worried that people who are concerned about police and such are going to be worried, are going to be thinking things that aren't related, and just that could be clarified a bit more, so it's less threatening.
That page, what page was that?
That was on page 17. My pages may be off by, I think it's page 16 on yours. I'm looking at the PDF and it says it's page 17. But I think it's page 16. So,
Thank you. That's a good catch.
okay, so that's all.
Mr. Schlickman.
Okay. As a former teacher, I also worry about a policy that requires putting them in the caddies and taking them out of the caddies and walking around with them in your hand in the hallway. But I want to get, I would also like if the chair would, after I ask this other question, is to inquire our student reps' opinions of this conversation that's going by, if they so choose to offer one. Because I'd like to hear from them on the topic. But I want to go to page 14 in the book, the 15th page in the PDF, pertaining to exempt absences that do not count towards the optional absence limit. The language says they include events such as religious observances, funerals and bereavement, extended illness and/or treatment, with documentation, suspensions, and certain approved absences, such as required field trips. I'm wondering, I'm not one to pick over adjectives, but I'm wondering if required is the right adjective, what we mean here, or shouldn't it be something more in line with an authorized field trip, such as a trip that is sponsored by the school during the school day with a school chaperone and a school bus, whether or not the trip is indeed required.
Dr. Jinger.
So that language is specific because there is a difference. A required field trip is part of a curricular program in a class, and required is part of the grade. So if you're in the backpacking class, in order to be in the backpacking class, you have to go on the backpacking trip. That's a required field trip. If your history class is going to the Dallin Museum for an enrichment activity, teachers are required, and that's not in the syllabus, and it's not required. Teachers need to make clear that the kids don't need to go, and that their grades will not be affected by their going. Those classes are optional excused absences. And the reason for that is because it could be necessary, depending on what a kid's signed up for a student to make choices about whether or not they attend those field trips. And we want, if you read particularly the FAQ on attendance, which tries to really explain this more, we want students to be making choices based on their situation, their classes, and their programs. And so, you know, you're not going to go to every one of those enrichment field trips if you're having too many of them. And so that's why there's a difference. Students have, remember though, 6 optional excused absences per class per quarter. A class meets about 36 times in a quarter. So if a student is otherwise generally attending their classes, that's not going to be an issue. A student has the flu for a couple of days and goes to 3 or 4 field trips, three field trips, that's not going to be an issue. But if a student has had the flu for a couple of days, not signed in, and they're getting up to 4 or 5 field trips, we want them to have a conversation with the dean. Now, they may get a letter from their doctor to excuse the flu, in which case they could still do the 5. But we want when you're getting over 6 in an individual class, we want you to be thinking about whether or not to go on the field trips, not just to go on all of them.
I know that we've had conversations in the past on the topic that would seem to come from students who are in the music and performing arts program. Are performing arts field trips where they're, let's say go to Carnegie Hall to perform, is that a required or an optional trip?
So we've had a conversation with the music department about being clear about which, if any, of their performance or concerts are required and which ones are optional. Going to Carnegie Hall, which is not part of a grade, which is not accessible to all students because it's not free, is not an exempt absence. It's an optional excused absence. For the students, they only missed a day or 2 of class. And again, remember, you have that window of 6 to spend. So it doesn't really become an issue unless a student is in significant attendance issues. And that's going to be a student who's been missing classes that are unexcused, so not documented by a doctor, and only excused by a parent or cutting classes. So it really does not become an issue for a student who's not having problems with attendance. If they are having problems with attendance at that level, they need to have a conversation with their dean and their parents about whether or not they're able to participate in that activity. And remember, there's, because those students look at the eligibility for the trip to something like Carnegie Hall, they're in danger of getting an FA, but they really shouldn't be going on those trips anyway.
Okay.
Give people flexibility, like six absences, a lot of absences.
I hear you.
Yeah. That's
I
way
hear
beyond
you,
what
but
it's.
I know that it's created anxiety among students as well. And, I don't want these things to be sources of anxiety, especially on kids who are very diligent and high-performing otherwise.
Right, but the students who are diligent and high-performing will not have an issue with those absences. And we've tried very hard to clarify that. We've talked about it with the students. We want them to be making responsible decisions, but there's no reason why they shouldn't miss a day or 2 of classes, because they're not going to end up. And, if you read the FAQ, it says, like, if you get the flu for a couple of days, you're not going to go over the FA policy. We're not going to give a kid the FA because they had missed 4 days of school and then got the flu for 3 days at the end of the quarter. They're going to have to call the nurse. We might have to have a conversation about how we exempt those absences for the flu. But we'll end up exempting the absences for the flu. It really would take a lot for a student to get an FA because they went to the Carnegie Hall trip if they were otherwise responsibly attending their classes.
And through the chair, would you invite our student reps to chime in on the cell phone policy?
Or they can chime in on anything they so choose,
Yes.
right? Is there any part of the handbook, given that you probably read it more carefully than I have at this point, is there any of it that you would like to speak to?
Speaking on our previous discussion about the phone policy, I'm in classrooms where teachers are very relaxed, some are strict, and I have some with caddies. And I personally believe that like with what we have at Arlington High School, with the level of respect and trust through teachers and students, with the open campus policy that's letting us be just young adults, I believe that like when we have a level of trust within a classroom when students are told to put away their phones and just have respect for the teacher and for the lesson. And I think that's where we really represent Arlington High School the best. I think there are some instances where teachers are too relaxed about it, and I see students around me have their phone out, and I do see it as disrespectful. And I think if there was a better, like, more connected policy about it, I think it would be like easier for the teachers to traverse this. And I do see that with my class that has a caddy, that students are very focused, and my teacher is very kind and gives us like 5 to 7 minutes at the beginning of class just to go on our phones or fill up water, go to the bathroom, do whatever we need. And I find that very nice. Yep, I know she's a pretty great teacher, but I think what most aligns with what I view of Arlington High School is to just have a designated spot and a level of respect within the student and teacher relationship.
I think in my experience, I also only have one class that uses the caddy, but I find that it's probably the best, like most efficient run class. A lot of times, like all my other classes have like backpack policies. There's no real way to ensure that they have it in their backpack. Like I've seen countless times, like teachers just like doing work on their computer, and a student will have it in their pocket and pull it out while the teacher's not looking. Like it's pretty hard to ensure that it's in their backpack because a pocket is pretty easy to hide. So it's kind of going against what Sophia was saying, but I personally think that the phone caddy method has worked the best in my experience. And there's not a huge distraction like putting it, like looking at your phone before and after you put it in class. Because a lot of times the expectation is like, first thing you do is you go to the phone caddy, you put your phone in the caddy, and then you walk to your desk. So you can't really like look at your phone at all. Maybe after class, but that's the only thing I've noticed.
And then speaking on the absences, in my personal experience, I had a lot of absences this quarter due to personal reasons, and I'm in the performing arts program, and we had an opportunity to perform at the State House, and I was really interested in this opportunity, and my course teacher tried hard to make it an excused absence so that seniors who were worried about their absence limit could still go on it. But she wasn't able to do that, and so she expressed to us that we could all talk to our deans if we were close to the absence limit to make sure that we were still able to go on this. And so with me going on this field trip, I did reach past my absence limit, but because I'm in good standing with all my classes and I reached out to my dean beforehand, they still let me go on this experience and made sure that just because of what was happening with me, it didn't impact my learning and enrichment. So I do see concerns with the absence policy and how it is very tight and narrow, at least I see that, but I think they still make it very open for students if they communicate their needs to still be able to go to opportunities.
Thanks for the feedback.
Great, thank you. Dr. Allison Nampy, did we ever get to you or no?
You did.
We did,
You
okay.
don't remember my wonderful things? Oh, well.
I do, it's, yes.
It was an hour ago.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none. All right, so we will schedule a meeting in July and do this again. Great, so the next item on our agenda is the Student Services Review. We have Bill Lupini and Cindy Tamor here with us. If you can come up, make sure you speak into the microphone. Apparently they're very directional, so they like really direct communication.
Can I get us started?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. So I would like to welcome Bill Lupini and Cindy Tamor here. Mr. Lupini, Dr. Tamor have been working with us this year to conduct a review of some things that we sort of specifically asked them to take a look at related to some leadership work that we need to do to make sure that we can implement the conditions associated with the new bargaining agreement. That was one of the things that was on our mind when we reached out to them and asked them to conduct a review. I think this is also part of some of the work in the strategic plan that says that we will do routine internal reviews conducted by the district in an effort to learn about areas that are areas of focus for us, to think about system-wide how we support each curricular area, how we organize the system in a way that will allow us to implement some of the changes that we want to make. We are learning about doing that because this is the first time we have done that. And we thought that some of the conditions in the new bargaining agreement around class balancing, caseloads, this was an opportunity for us to take a look at that, think about how and where we are consistent, where we could continue to improve. And their efforts have been focused on some of that work that we need to do. So with that, I will hand it over, have the two of you introduce yourselves, and when you need me to switch the slide, let me know, and I will hit go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be here and to share with all of you our findings. Again, we met with at least 3 of you as part of our interviews, met with several, most staff, did not meet with staff below administrative level. Coordinators, team chairs, central office, we're all interviewed. Bill and I have done a number of these. You can see the list we've done in the report.
Liz, you can go to the second one. Thank you.
And what happens is usually when we go into these districts, we go in with a question that the district wants answered, and it sort of morphs from there as we come across information that we think is relevant to your next steps. So that is exactly what happened here. We came in originally looking at trying to give you some information around your caseload language, and we began to delve into other issues having to do with both special education and general ed.
Yeah, and that's usually where these go, as Cindy said. The first one of these that we did together, I always notice, is Belmont, and they in particular wanted us to look at the numbers of students in their out-of-district placements, which very quickly, as has in most of these others, turned into a conversation about regular education and multi-tiered levels of support and DCAPs and all those kinds of things, whether that's where they thought we would go originally or not. Andover and the greater Commonwealth Virtual School that are up there are ones that we will be starting. These others have all been reports that we've recently completed.
So you have the full report. What we have is a slide presentation, which is basically an executive summary. We invite you to ask questions as we move through the slides. We don't know if you've had an opportunity to read the whole report, but we will hopefully answer any questions that you have.
Cindy, I should say, because we didn't do this at the beginning, Cindy and I have bios here. I'd love to introduce you. Cindy is a great colleague of mine, has been a superintendent, assistant superintendent, special education director, and an interim collaborative director. Can't leave that off, right? The EDCO experience. And my experience is 25 years as a school superintendent, most of that time spent in Beverly and Brookline. And also I had an experience with the lab collaborative and had the opportunity to work with your administrators and the other school districts during that year of being the interim and then helping to bring on the new executive director.
So, and I'm the one who closed EDCO. I always admit to it.
I'll leave that to you to say.
Yes, which you belong to as well.
I do.
We have to tell you that overall, while there are some needs in Arlington, some matters you have to address, you are so well resourced. You have kept such a high level of commitment to staffing that it is unusual, especially in 2025, as many districts are facing some very serious cuts. So kudos to the committee for the work they have done on that and for the town commitment to education. Basically, you have a very deep structure. Liz, I guess we're moving on. I'm sorry, I'm on one thing right now. Project methodology, literature review, interviews with people, additional interviews, review of similar districts. We had preliminary findings, and then we had the final findings and recommendations.
And within this other category, I mean, Cindy already mentioned that we had the opportunity to meet with some of your school committee members. We also had the opportunity to meet with representatives of your CPAC.
Okay, go ahead, Liz. So in particular, we highlight what the general consensus was from your people that we interviewed. I should tell you that we tell everybody that the interviews are confidential. We don't use any names because we want them to feel able to share with us their experiences and their thinking. So again, they want the development of strong programs that enable as many students with disabilities as possible to be successful. Strong, consistent practices and protocols that enable special education process to work more effectively and efficiently. Commitment to a culture of collaboration, curiosity, and mutual respect in which to create options and opportunities for students. Identification of solutions that would offer Arlington students a wider range of programming options that would in turn provide more opportunities for students to remain directly supported by and actively involved in Arlington, and clear and flexible guidelines for implementing the collective bargaining language. So these were the key questions that we settled on. We went back and forth with Liz and Allison a few times, and these are the questions that we hit upon as we worked with people. We don't write a report where we say, question one, here's the answer, question two. It's more of a narrative of what our findings were. Two slides of those. Go ahead. Okay. And at the end of the day, we came out with recommendations in 6 categories, as you can see here. Having to do with your structure and your leadership, your programming options and through lines, your analysis of the staffing distributions and caseloads, opportunities for team teaching, inclusion, and reorganization, multi-tiered system of supports, and communication, culture, and collaboration. While we were doing this, you were working on your budget, and Liz was bringing forth to you many of the gaps that we were also hearing about. So while we were gathering information, you were also actually addressing some of the issues that we were hearing about. So it was almost a simultaneous process for us.
And we'll point out some of those, I think, as we go through.
Okay.
Yeah, so in this category of organizational structure and leadership, you, as you know, have a structure that involves coordinators, team chairs, and out-of-district coordinator. There was a perception that we encountered from a number of the interviews that the district has not been successful at retaining coordinators and chairpersons, and indeed, I think we could say other special education roles as well. And there was a perception that came through, particularly around your district-wide programs located in schools, particularly elementary schools, that regarding principals' knowledge of and their role in special education decisions, meaning there was a feeling that there might be inconsistency regarding program X because of the principal in that building compared to program Y in a different building. The accommodations that we offered here, we looked at data around team chairs and coordinators and cited it in the report that indeed, in terms of the average experience level in Arlington of these roles, they're very high. They're higher than most of the districts that I do work in this area or in other areas around. That your chairs and coordinators are highly attuned to the changes in the special education population and in regulations and their roles, and that indeed your district, this is one of those areas that will cited a number of times, had proposed, and I believe is included in the FY26 budget. Our recommendations in particular were around clarity regarding supervision and evaluation responsibilities between chairs, coordinators, who's responsible for what, who evaluates who, those kinds of pieces, very important. Clarity regarding leadership roles in special education processes. So, what is the role of a principal with respect to the district-wide program that happens to be located in their building? What exactly is that role? Is it consistently monitored, worked with by the chairs and coordinators? And consistent implementation of expectations in the IEP team process, similar comment. I will say, because I work with a number of, during our interviews, a couple districts in particular were mentioned as places where special educators from Arlington go to work. You do a great deal of training for people in these roles. That training is very valuable to other districts that don't necessarily devote the same kinds of resources to that training. And they hire those people. We don't have a specific in terms of why do they leave. Some things were suggested to us in this process. I've talked to some of those people in at least one of those other districts. And they're all over the map in terms of the reason that they leave, right? They live closer to those towns, and nobody loves driving down 128 to get here. They took a position that's more of a leadership role that wasn't available to them here. The reasons were varied. One of the reasons I have heard from some of them is that this is a very high-powered place to work. I'm familiar with that, having spent 11 years in Brookline, that this is a more difficult place to work than maybe Town X, where they've relocated to. Again, one of these 2 or 3 towns that people told us that they leave Arlington to go to. But you do lose some people. I would say the main reasons, however, tended to revolve around being closer to home, not having that drive, and a promotional opportunity that was available there that wasn't going to be available to them here. Oh, we should say, we didn't say, please feel free to ask questions as we go. You do not have to wait till the end of this presentation to ask any questions you might have. Cindy?
How many people did you talk to?
You're gonna have to go back.
You talked to former teachers to get this information? From Arlington?
Yeah.
How many?
North of a half dozen.
Okay. But you didn't talk to any current teachers?
No,
No, hold on. We didn't talk to them as part of this process. I happen to do other work in that district around educator evaluation.
Okay.
What comes up in that district time and time again is, oh, this person's new, they came here. Where'd they come from? They came from Arlington. Oh, we happen to be doing this study for them, right? That kind of, I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear.
But the bottom line here is, again, as we started out, you are well-resourced and you invest in your resources. You train almost all of your people in literacy, in whether it's Wilson or OG or something else. That makes them highly marketable to other districts that are not spending money doing the same.
Yes. And that's what's happening.
And that's what happens.
But again, to the credit of this district, when sort of we laid those pieces out and said, would you do anything differently as a result of that? The answer was no. We continue to train people, and we'll continue to train people to take those roles as those people possibly depart for those promotional opportunities, which I think is the right answer.
I just also want to note that, we were, there are things that I think you're saying are perceptions. Doesn't mean it's not reality. It doesn't mean that, it's not worth us interrogating data surrounding some of that. And we have had, and we've talked about this as part of the budget process, places where we really struggle with retention and other places where we don't. We're trying to learn from the places where we're not struggling with the retention so that we can improve it. And that's been some of the rationale behind proposals for FY26. But where sort of ideas were raised, I think you all will say there's a perception here, and it's worth looking at data for if you all didn't have data for it. But it's not to say, by saying perception, that it is not reality. Also, that it's not a felt thing that families experience, that it's not something that's very real within our data, even if it's not the average or the aggregate.
Well, that's right. And when it's your building's team chair, you're a parent and it's that team chair who leaves, that, quite frankly, the data is less important than our team chair just left.
Right.
So can I just,
I'm sorry, Lynn.
go ahead.
No, so
and-
I'm going to call on you so that we can do this. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Cardin.
And I'm just pointing out that we can't see.
I know, which is
so-
tough.
All right.
Yeah.
So yes, so was there other data besides the average you looked at? Because the average of a relatively small group can be a little bit misleading.
Well, the concern we heard
Yeah,
was mainly about the team chairs and
Right.
the coordinators. So we went through all the data. We have a list of who's been here how many years. and
okay,
we
so you know
have-
that half of the team chairs have been here less than 3 years. 6 out of 12 have been here less than 3 years.
I think that so I want to go double check this. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I think that when we initially looked at that, and we might need to do a correction to the final report, that I was looking at coordinators. I think that sentence changed to coordinators and team chairs. I think we need to clarify that.
Okay.
We can do that.
And I think I might have missed that in that final
Well,
round.
actually,
if the
when I
sentence
look back,
changed.
and when I look back in the report, it was the team chairs and coordinators together. We averaged them in together. All the people who have those really important roles in the SPED process.
There are team chairs that have turned over that have been with the district for a long time, that have not necessarily been in that role at that school. But I'm not sure if that's what I averaged when we went and pulled that data, so.
So this is a convoluted answer to your question, and we will dig deeper on those data in the final report.
And we also have data on special ed teachers as well. And we have added a lot of special ed teachers, more than regular ed teachers, so that does throw the averages off a little bit. But the average for all teachers is 8.6 years. The median, which is also something to look at, is 6.4 years. In special education, it goes down to 4.4 years on average, 2.4 as the median. So maybe that's not abnormal, but we definitely have more turnover in special ed than in
We do
regular
it
ed.
in the population as a whole. Yeah, I'd want to look at that. I think we can get those data on some of those comparison districts, and, because I think it's a good point. Yeah, are those numbers out of line for special educators? My guess is they're not.
They're not.
But I would like to put some real comparisons to that.
Throughout this process, and we had some difficulty because there is such, I said to myself yesterday, what are the 3 words that I would describe Arlington needing? And I came away with clarity, consistency, and fidelity. And everything that comes forward is, every one of these 6 recommendations, it comes back to those 3 words: clarity, consistency, fidelity. And when you talk about maybe having turnover, if you were going to do root cause analysis, there's lots of reasons why teachers leave. We were both superintendents. I heard Mr. Schlickman say he was a teacher at one point. There's lots of reasons teachers leave. The days where teachers stayed for the 30, 35 years of their career are few and far between nowadays. We're a much more mobile society for a lot of reasons. But one of the things about, in the SPED world especially, it is a high-stress position. We all know that. And where you do not have clarity around processes and programs, where you do not have consistency between your buildings, or fidelity to processes, or instructional strategies, that raises that stress level. And that's the consideration that we came out of this with. You are so well-resourced, your people are so well-trained, they're so knowledgeable. You know, actually, the head of your early childhood center worked for me at one point in my career. It's just that what we kept hearing over and over again was, well, at this building, but at this building, but at this building. Okay? And that's what we ended up trying to get to. I'm going off script here and off the presentation. Allison and I, as sped people have a tendency to do, we began to go down the rabbit hole around terminology. And I kept saying, why are they telling me co-teaching? And she kept saying to me, it's not co-teaching, it's inclusion. And I'm saying, but they're telling me co-teaching. And that is a small example where if you don't have common language at every level, across every grade, you confuse not only the people who work for you, you confuse parents. And when they go to ask for services, they say, well, I was told I get co-teaching. And the answer is, well, we don't do co-teaching at the such and such elementary school. But I was told, because you're not having that common language and that consistency. So that's why when I think about what it has all come down to, it's those three words: clarity, consistency, fidelity. Another example, and again, we'll go through the slides. At one school, you have a principal who has found a way to do at least tier 1 multi-tiered system of support. At another school, they tell us it doesn't even happen here. So does that mean your people don't know the instructional strategies? I doubt that highly, because you've trained them. But you're not getting that commonality among your buildings.
Can I just ask one quick question, just sort of overarching, just so that I can
Sure.
frame this? Because I'm hearing a lot from both of you we've talked to these people. So to clarify, you didn't, as part of this process, speak to any of our general or special education teachers who work directly with our kids. Is that correct?
No.
So you only spoke to coordinators, team chairs, and
Principals, central office,
okay.
CPAC.
So when you're saying they said we're not doing MTSS as part of tier 1, that is the report from these folks, but not from actual classroom educators. Okay. And are they saying this is what I'm hearing from teachers, or no, this is just the perception? I suppose all we can infer from it is this is the perception of these folks.
I wouldn't even say it was the perception, Jane. I would say it's their responsibility to make it happen. When you're a building principal, you're the instructional leader of that building. You're supposed to know what happens in your building. I mean, you have, I'm going to use the term child study teams in all your buildings. Okay? You have that process. What comes out of that process was inconsistent. Some people are very good about it. Other people are not. That is the responsibility, because MTSS is a general ed function. That is the responsibility of the principal, not the responsibility of a teacher. Teacher will deliver the service, implement it, but it's the responsibility of the principal to make sure that this system happens in his or her building.
Right, yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you. Mr. Schlippen.
Just a quick follow-up on this. Is this an instance that the delivery of services is inconsistent, or that the services may be delivered properly, that we're actually doing tier 1 instruction, but they're not calling it that?
That's probably more likely, because as I said, I know they've been trained. I mean, and you've invested in that training. But part of the problem from a special ed point of view is, and I'm a big proponent of MTSS. If you have a robust MTSS system, it will prevent referrals to special ed.
Yes.
All right? We both know this. So you have to have a robust process in place, and it has to be consistent across buildings, so that, quite honestly, every kid has the same opportunity. And from what we heard in conversation is people did not have, they had their child study teams or their ILT or whatever they were calling it, but I mean, I can look back at my notes at the quotes where somebody would say to me, well, I do this, this, and this, and somebody else would say to me, oh, we don't do that.
So I'd say both pieces of your question might be the case depending on the building that we're talking about. That would be my answer to your question.
Okay, okay. I'm putting my former principal hat on in this one. Okay, thank you.
I do number 2?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Liz.
So options and through lines. So again, this goes back to what we said, you're delivering services. When we look at your out-of-district numbers are low. You use your collaborative appropriately so, not a lot of private placements. So you're delivering services, but what happens for families is they don't understand that as I move from the elementary to the 6th grade, to the middle, to what is happening, that I'm going to assure that I'm going to get similar services. So the through lines are not clear. The description on the website is limited. Allison and I have had some conversation about, you don't want to be prescriptive, where parents are saying, I want one of those, I want one of those, I want one of those. But you want to say to people, this is what we offer at every level, so that a student who enters us at age 3 and continues to age 22 has his or her needs met the whole way up.
I think we heard this, I'll go to one of the other reports that we did. I think we heard this best in another district that we worked in, where a parent said, I have a child, they're in one of those programs at the elementary level. All I want to know is what's in store for my child as possibilities in the future. And where I don't have that information, I get very nervous, I get very concerned, I get very scared, right? And so I think that's what Cindy's saying. And again, we have spent quite a bit of time, right, Allison, discussing this issue of making sure that those probabilities, those possibilities are available for people.
And as you all know, the Gibbs is a problem, because, again, I'm putting on my SPED hat here. When you're working with children with needs, the relationship you build with that child and with that family is the most valuable thing you have. When you talk about high-powered parents or parents who are demanding, they have to believe that you believe in their kid, that they can trust you, and that someone's looking out for their child. When you have a lot of transitions, they have to start over every time. And at the Gibbs especially, we kept hearing about how difficult that was. Again, Arlington made the choice it made for whatever reasons it made, all right? You're not dissimilar to other communities who've had to make similar choices about their grade span and what buildings they put them in. But we heard a lot about that seemed to be a breaking point for where parents' relationships were with you. And again, if you don't have clear through lines, people are going to get very hypervigilant. Yeah, is my child getting what he or she needs? On the other hand, your staff, again, as we started out saying, they're very knowledgeable about special ed, about the laws, about programming, about services, and they are empowered to make decisions as they need to. So again, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to use language-based classroom. If you're in an elementary school, you may have a half a dozen students who need a language-based classroom. You have somewhat of economy of scale. When you get to the Gibbs, you only have maybe one child who needs a language-based classroom. That becomes problematic because now you don't have a program per se, because you only have one child in that building. That doesn't mean the child is not being attended to. Your people are crafting individualized programs so that nobody loses ground, but it's not perceived as the same way as, oh, my student is in the, am I on A, B, C, or D? What am I on, Allison? Whatever, the SLC, whatever you call it, at the elementary school. But they are making the adjustments they need to make as kids move through the grades. So our recommendations is to articulate that continuum of services in writing. Maybe even toot your own horn about how you are responsive and you create IEPs that meet a student's services, even if you don't have a program. Again, professional development regarding tiered interventions, inclusion expectations, disability categories and options for providing individualist services. I want to say a couple of things on this. One of the things that we did hear from mid-level administrators is they feel that not every general ed classroom is welcoming to students with disabilities. And when you talk about your new contract language, that becomes a factor. Okay?
Wait a minute. Can you,
Hold on just a second. Yeah.
that was sort of an interesting statement, and I'm not sure what you're saying by that last sentence.
They really felt that, you have a philosophy of inclusion, all right? Children belong in general ed classrooms. Nobody disagrees with that. I always word it as every student has a right to a standards-based education, no matter who they are. There is a feeling that if you have B-grid services, when I push in as the special ed teacher, I take care of those kids over there. And as the general ed teacher, I have all these kids over here. That's not inclusion.
Right.
You know, that's parallel play, like the babies do.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was expressed to us several times. So again, I'm not saying teachers don't want to do it. What I have found is if they're afraid they'll do it wrong, they sometimes pull back. So maybe what is needed is very specific training on inclusion and what is needed in an inclusive classroom. And again, this is just what, we're giving you what was reported out to us.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, gotcha, yeah.
Len.
Thank you. So this is important because the statements that you're making are very generalized, but again, you haven't talked to the teachers who are in those classrooms. So are these parents that are reporting these concerns? Are they the team chairs, the coordinators? I mean, can you give us a little bit more about
The
where?
team chairs and the coordinators.
Okay.
What? And it's from CPAC, they're from CPAC.
Ms. Exton.
Can you explain why you didn't talk to any teachers or people who are student-facing on a day-to-day basis?
I think when we came in to do this, that we spoke to the people we were given access to.
Yeah, and that's the methodology we've used in all the studies that we've done.
Because when I look at the questions, on the second bullet point, what does the MTSS system look like in Arlington as described by the administrators, as described by teachers? So if that's a question you are setting out to answer, in order to get an answer from teachers, you would need to talk to teachers. So I don't know where that communication fell off, but I feel like there's a huge gap, and I think people are alluding to that in all of this by not having had a conversation with the people who work with the students in this district face to face every single day.
So
Yep, Dr. Holman.
I think, first of all, it was named in the review that was a limitation of the study. And it is a limitation that we agree is limiting. And I think when I said, we're learning about doing these reviews on a routine basis, that some of the questions that were there, I believe, may have led me to believe, and maybe even to voice, but I honestly can't remember, that perhaps teachers would be included and that we would have that voice included. And it's not. And it's not the scope of reviews that these two have done in other spaces. And so this is a lesson learned, I think, for us. And these are people, like the folks they talk to, observe classrooms, evaluate teachers. You said that this came from coordinators. Coordinators evaluate educators and talk to special educators on a regular basis. Team chairs are in meetings with families, teachers on a regular basis. They have a vantage point that is worth interrogating further for us. And so there are going to be limitations of any study. We acknowledge that. I think us talking about what the expectations will be moving forward when we do reviews and who we want to make sure are included and what activities are included is important. And we also acknowledge that there might be further work for us to do to corroborate findings, to back it up against data, to back it up against interviews with educators as well. We were very upfront about the fact that this has its limitations because it didn't include educators in the interviews or classroom visits in the process. That's not to say that future ones can't, or that we can't continue that work in that way.
So I guess I'm going to take my opportunity to just say, I think what's hard for me to hear, because I know that this didn't touch our student-facing staff, it's very hard for me to hear that there are perceptions or generalizations that teachers don't feel comfortable doing inclusion, that they don't feel comfortable, like that there are sort of segregations in classrooms where like these students are being dealt with over here, and then I'm going to take care of these students. I accept that that may be the opinion of some of our coordinators and team chairs, but that we don't have the voice of the people who they're talking about, who are saying maybe, I do feel comfortable doing this. I don't feel comfortable doing that. It's hard for me. I don't find the feedback that the perception of a certain subset of staff, that a certain other subset of staff is uncomfortable doing something actionable because we didn't hear from this other group, if that makes sense, right? So I have sort of an emotional reaction to hearing. And again, you're getting it because you're here, right? So I understand that. You're reporting to us what our staff is saying about other staff that we didn't talk to, right? So I'm really conflicted in terms of how to sort of take that and do anything with it, I suppose. So I just want to be really honest about that sort of reaction to that. Mr. Schlickman and then Dr. Allison Ampe.
I've got to say, I'm not reacting because, I'm looking at this as unpeeling an onion. And if you're looking to do this sort of a programmatic study, you're going to start with the overall central, and you're going to peel down to the point where you can get to. Given the time and resources, it's logical to start here in central and then the people who connect into central. I have found in terms of working with team chairs, that they've got a pretty good sense of what's going on, particularly within the context of inclusion, because they're not the ones who are delivering the services, but they do sort of have an instinctive and base knowledge of where they can write things into IEPs, and they're going to be carried out versus where there's going to be conflicts based on either the relationship between the special educators and the classroom teachers or some other obstacle. So to the extent of how far you've gone and what I've heard so far, I think your observations have been on point, not to take them as fact, but to take them as we've gone through a couple of layers of the onions, which has now given us, as qualitative researchers, a sense of who we're going to talk to next and what the next set of questions are. Because if you raise the question of teachers not implementing fully an inclusion program because they're because of an unease, because they don't feel sufficiently trained and resourced or knowledgeable to pull it off successfully, then the next logical question is to start talking to those teachers. But you haven't gotten to that point, and I'm not going to criticize you for that. That's just the structure of the study. And as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at this saying, this is done by thoughtful educators who understand special education, understand school districts, and I'm finding the feedback you're giving, limited as it is, to be a very useful starting point for the next set of conversations.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Thanks. So I think my feedback's somewhat similar to Paul's in that I agree that I don't have the same concern that you do, Ms. Morgan, about not being able to accept the idea that someone is saying that there's essentially parallel play kind of setup going on in a classroom, because they're reporting what they see. And yes, we could go back and find out more about what's happening, but I think what it's doing is raising something to be looked at. That doesn't mean what's being seen is definitely what's happening everywhere, but it gives principals and other supervisory roles, people to something to be looking at when they're going into classrooms and talking about how inclusion is being done. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is I am concerned that it doesn't sound like there was very much parental input given, and I mean, like the lack of teacher input, I think that hampers the study from being as helpful and useful as it could be, because I don't think CPAC is necessarily a representative sample. So that's all.
Ms. Gittleson, and then we'll get back to your to your slides.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to chime in here because I share Ms. Exton and Ms. Morgan's sort of puzzlement about how to interpret the data. And I am not an educator, but I will say that, I've learned a lot about MTSS and inclusion and all of these areas we're concerned about in this conversation over the last couple of years of being a school committee member. And while, I see what Mr. Schlichtman and Dr. Allison Ampe are saying, and that this is a place to start, it does position, it starts us in a position where if I were a general ed classroom teacher, I might start off feeling pretty defensive. And since we're trying to build a collaborative, inclusive, system that is working for everybody, I think it's worth noting.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to say I'm Julie Keys. I'm the president of the Arlington Education Association. I'm also a 7th grade teacher. I am a trained co-teacher. I do want to clarify for anybody who's watching at home that parallel teaching is one of the accepted modes of co-teaching. And it's okay to see that sometimes. It's not the only one you ever want to use, but it is one of the trainings that we go to when we're learning how to be co-teachers. So that's one thing. I've been reading through the full report while you've been speaking. Almost everything in here absolutely aligns with what I see as somebody who works district-wide, because I support people from pre-K through grade 12 in the district. I'd like to hear the rest of what you have to say without hearsay and without assuming intentions of people third hand, because I have real concerns about that. Thank you.
So where are we?
I think we had made it through
This slide.
this slide.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, the comment I want to offer to that piece that Cindy touched on is that while we recognize that the decisions around the creation of Gibbs were made for other reasons, that is a very difficult, a one-grade school is a very difficult situation with respect to the kinds of things that we're talking about here. We've heard the history throughout this study from many, many people of the kinds of things that people have tried to approximate those through lines, sometimes more successfully than others. And we did note the kinds of things that are happening there this year. But that is a very, very difficult model to actually put in place and have people be comfortable with for their children. So we can go to 3. Yeah, so in terms of the analysis of staffing distribution and caseloads, Cindy said this at the beginning, you have, among the studies we've done and other places that I've worked with, more significant staffing to provide many tiered supports across schools than just about anybody that we've run into, and that's to your credit. Your level of contracted services, which like many other districts, increased leading up to and through COVID and coming out of COVID, have begun to be addressed, to be alleviated, except in the area of paraprofessionals, which is something that, quite frankly, of the, I think, 15 districts that I work with, that I'm seeing across those districts. There were some concerns raised, again, this is a point that Cindy made up front. There were concerns raised about a number of positions in our interviews, and then when we were able to circle back, we found that nearly all of those were part of the FY26 budget that was proposed and that you've adopted. And there's a great deal of concern regarding the 50% provision and the caseload language in the collective bargaining agreement. We heard that in almost every interview that we conducted. The commendations here where the leadership appears to be responsive to concerns for additional staff, as I said, and that Arlington is well-staffed. A couple things on recommendations in this area. One that I want to, it's here somewhere, but I'll skip, is that one of the things that we found that we thought was really terrific was that you have a number of people in schools who've been playing around with the idea of caseloads and how to deal with them within their school with formulas and other kinds of adaptations for a while now. And one of the suggestions that we made is that those conversations should occur at this level. And there are probably some things to be learned in those discussions that could be utilized on a district level. I think the one thing that became apparent to us, I think that we came into this with and ended up being a conversation, is that this is not a simple math problem. People who think that this is a simple math problem in terms of you have X number of IEPs in a classroom, and therefore we should have provisions around that's missing the majority of the point, because every IEP is different and needs to be thought of in that way. So, and again, you have some principals who've been thoughtfully trying to figure that out with their staff, with their teachers, around how we might do that, and coming up with some things that are very, very interesting to do. The 50% threshold language, again, some of the concerns that we heard, I think some of it's a matter of communication to this point, because there were some concerns about, well, what does that mean to co-taught classes? What does that mean to classes at the high school where kids who have IEPs and weren't able to access, for example, a first year of a language at the middle level and now come, and so our first level of Spanish 1 is more than 50% students with IEPs. Does that count toward this particular collective bargaining provision? And again, our discussions said to us, we were told that it does not appear to include co-taught classes or those classes, but making that very, very clear and having those conversations is very, very important. Some principals have already developed promising models. I said that already. Flexibility will be key to looking at these threshold and caseload issues. And again, not assuming that an IEP is an IEP is an IEP. And that the district should conduct an analysis. I think we said this a couple of different times. You should be able to conduct an analysis of the numbers of teaching assistants that you have, where they are, what they do, so that you have a good accounting for those practices and how they're utilized when you get requests from principals or others to add to that inventory of people in those roles.
One of the interesting things that came out about the 50% language is some of your principals were not concerned about it. And again, because they felt that they had already put into place systems in their own buildings that addressed it. So, the curiosity became, well, why did this become why has this become a contractual issue? Again, that's not ours to delve into, but I think that, again, it's, aside from the co-taught classes, when I think about, when you talk about caseloads, it gets so specific because it becomes not how many kids you're on your caseload, but how many hours of service are you delivering and where? How many students are in the C grid? How many hours in the C grid? How many hours in the B grid? So it's not like counting FTEs for teachers. It's a very different calculation. And one of your principals is really working at trying to think about it from that point of view of how many hours of service do I need to dedicate this particular person to? Where do I fit in their free period? Where do I fit in their lunch? As opposed to how many students are they responsible for? So it's a lot more complicated than it appears.
And I don't want to skip to number 6, but I will for a moment without going there. And I don't mean to sort of turn this on all of you, but when I just said what I said about the classes at the high school with students with IEPs were not able to access courses at the middle school and said what we were told, I took a scan around the room, and my guess is there isn't a shared understanding of that here. So my guess is there's not a shared understanding of that out there. And there needs to be, right? Whether it's through that group or in some norms that are set up front as to what we're looking at and what we're not looking at. That's a really important point to your high school principal, to others, right? And that everyone goes into sort of that subcommittee with that shared understanding of what isn't and isn't part of this discussion.
The other thing is, that's in the full report, is we looked at other communities, and the only district with prescriptive language is Lexington. Everybody else has very vague language. We'll make every effort, that type of language.
I think the
So
key.
we can just speak to this one just quickly.
Yeah.
So a little bit of clarity around the assumptions around co-taught classes. And I guess what I would just say, as the chair of this committee that agreed to this collective bargaining unit, we are not Lexington, we are not Malden, we are Arlington. We agreed, as part of our bargaining, we agreed to this, right? And so we are going to do it, whether it, that's what we're going to do, irregardless. To be perfectly honest, I mean, with all due respect to the concerns or agita of our administrative staff, right? This committee made this agreement with AEA Unit A, and our direction to our staff is going to be to implement it.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I would make right to that. One is, I don't disagree with any of that. I wasn't here. I'm not part of that discussion. I think the key is deciding what it is. What is it? Right? That's number one. Number two is, and I think the point we really want to leave this section with, is you have some people who are being very creative about trying some things that seem to be working and that may be able to be taken to scale in other parts beyond their building. And that's really good news. That's really good news and says a lot about the teachers and administrators in those buildings.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
Liz? Okay.
Yes.
Again, as we started out saying earlier, there seemed to be confusion about co-teaching versus inclusion. Co-teaching begins at the Gibbs, I believe, and then moves up. At the elementary schools, it's still very much an inclusion model with B-grid services where somebody pushes in. And again, there's a section in here where we talk about communication. There is so much misperception that was reported to us. I think out of anything, that's what surprised us. And how you're communicating what your services are, what the consistency is across buildings, is becoming very important. Because again, parents, listen, we all know there's no place worse than the Little League field. My son goes to X, Y, and Z, and he's getting this. Well, my son is at A, B, and C. Why isn't he getting the same? And again, we know it's very individualized, but parents don't understand the decision-making that goes in to why some services are provided some children and not others. The high school reports the availability of co-teaching across content areas. Matt talked about a self-selection process that sometimes tilts the numbers. You have probably a couple of problems there. Sometimes people well-intended think a child belongs in co-teaching for whatever reason, and then you sometimes have parents who find their children are in co-teaching and don't want them there, and that sometimes tilts your numbers. It was reported to us from your chairs and your coordinators that when these IEPs are written, there's an overemphasis on pull-out, particularly at the elementary, and not inclusion. Again, you're committed to developing inclusive classes. You're committed to developing a range of services from most restrictive to least restrictive to most. What we recommended, again, was a clear and accountable plan for the implementation of inclusion across the district, professional development and best instructional strategies. And that's not saying you people don't know what to do. What we're finding in the special education world is our kids are changing. The needs are changing. And something that worked 5 years ago may not work now. We know the autism numbers, we know the behavior numbers. You added a BCBA. So making sure you people are keeping up with what they need is very important. More attention to why a student requires or will benefit from a co-taught class. I'm going to say it here as a SPED person, there's a difference between must-have and nice-to-have. And sometimes when we get to IEP meetings, there's a lot of nice-to-have as opposed to must-have. And there has to be some really good conversation. Why does a student need a co-taught class? Why does a student need B grid versus C grid? Again, most special ed people will tell you our job is to put ourselves out of business. We want kids to grow and be more independent, especially as they go up the ladder. And ongoing training in the DCAP. I know you're rewriting your DCAP, I believe. But we were a little bit surprised at administrators that we're not familiar with the DCAP. And again, as I said earlier, a lot of this is your administrator's job. No questions?
Liz? In the recommendation around MTSS, as Cindy just said, it was reported to us in most of the discussions that we had that the current DCAP is outdated and is underutilized in the school. And the word of this section may be inconsistency. The MTSS work has not been yet been deeply implemented with fidelity and consistency across schools, which I think we have at least one paragraph in here commenting that that's not, even after the development of a good MTSS system, that is not abnormal. It takes a number of years to implement that and implement it well with a great devotion of professional development time to it. You do have ILT and SST. The expectation at the district level is that those are implemented across all schools. And what we found in our interviews with principals is there's some inconsistency to that implementation. There is implementation of various regular education intervention strategies, but they vary across schools. Some of that variance is to be expected. Others of it, we would have expected to see more consistency. And elementary schools, and this came largely from those principals, have not historically, and I think the key word there is historically, been viewed as a team working together. We talked about the district's intent to revise the DCAP within the MTSS frameworks this summer. That's great news. And the work you've done, particularly in the ELA curriculum, the development of data systems, and creating a deep bench of trained general educators, general education and special education staff. I think our key recommendation here is the development of clear, transparent implementation plans around DCAP and MTSS. And I was commenting to Cindy as you were having the conversation about cell phones. This next piece is really a clear understanding of what the non-negotiables are in implementation of these initiatives. That is not to say that every school should look like every other school, but it is to say that there are certain things that should be non-negotiables. There should not be autonomy around them. There should be some tight coupling around the way they function from building to building, because in that inconsistency is where we get the kinds of discussions that we had with your CPAC in particular, or as one example, of the inconsistencies of what happens at this school versus what happens at that school, what happens in this program versus what happens in that program. And what we're suggesting here, and I've done it, is a very open conversation about what things we do as schools that are consistent, that are tightly coupled, and what things there are that are for the principal to have more autonomy, or for the staff and principal to have more autonomy within. And quite frankly, if I could have recorded your conversation about the cell phones earlier, that would be a great example as you were wrestling with what that might look like across schools. That's the kind of conversation around these areas that we're suggesting.
It is recorded, by the way.
Excellent, thank you.
So as I referenced earlier before, again, we came away with this concern about communication. Is there a consistent message? Is there a consistent explanation of services? Is there a consistent explanation of programs, pre-K through 22, being shared with parents, with regular education people, regular education teachers? They want to know, I'm sending my student on to the middle school. What is going to happen to the student there? And there was no consistency. Again, clear investment in raising the bar for what is already a strong district. I think that if you have those clear message, that common language, that consistency between your buildings, Arlington will be even stronger than it already is. And again, accommodation in your FY26 budget, you had a clear focus on your high-risk groups, and you're to be commended for that. Recommendations, we come back to the same, somehow some sort of written material so people know, an explicit continuum of services, a reduction of transitions where possible. Very important for your principals of your receiving school or the coordinator from the receiving school to be at those transition meetings. I know they say they are. And a strong message that all staff are responsible for all students. So that's what this section came away with. As I said earlier, if I had used 3 words, it was clarity, consistency, fidelity among all your buildings.
And I just want to point out something here relative to the conversation that occurred earlier. I understand the concern about an aspect of these studies that we haven't necessarily regularly engaged in these studies, that is the interviewing of teachers. But there are data points that make these points as well, right? And there was one in a slide that Cindy just did earlier about sort of higher numbers in terms of pullout services, right? Well, that tells me something, right, that is consistent with what came out of some of these interviews, right? That is that students are spending more time potentially, and again, I'd want to dig into that more, outside of the classroom to get those services, and that possibly a number of those services could occur in the classroom. And that may go back to the DCAP, that may go back to the implementation of MTSS. Those are things yet to be determined. Yeah, all we say in the last slide is that one of the things that we talk to districts about is that there are a number of these, sometimes the number of these areas that we recommend end up being higher cost items. You've built a number of them into the FY26 budget to all of your credit. So the staff to implement tier 2, tier 3 interventions is there. I believe your principals would agree with that. I believe your special ed leadership would agree with that. The documents are in process of being created. If I would go to those areas Cindy talked about, and my focus would be on trying to figure out where we need to be more consistent across our schools in our communication and in our practice as elementary principals, et cetera. That's where I would focus. But we've sort of laid out some ideas for short-term versus long-term. And again, we're happy to answer any remaining questions you may have.
Great. Questions from the committee?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Schlickman.
Recognizing that the kind of study you're doing is basically structure and system. Okay? And that in many ways, we set the budget, we set the policies. That's sort of our responsibility as a structure and system in terms of what we're doing as a committee and the decisions we're making. And I'm very heartened to hear that you're very appreciative in response to our efforts to improve instruction for our focal groups. But the one word that came up a lot, particularly focused on special education, is transitions. And it was now over 10 years ago when we opened the Gibbs, and we made a very difficult decision as how we were going to open that. Would we go and have two middle schools, a small middle school in the east and a large middle school in the west, or would we go and split it 6 at the Gibbs, 7, 8 at the Addison, with the hopes that we can create a unified transition and middle school experience across the two buildings? So that seems to me the elephant in the room in this discussion. From your heart, from your experience as superintendents, and you've got a very good record as superintendents and special educators and for collaborative people, if you were making recommendations to the committee regarding our structure 5 to 6 to 7, 8, what would you have us thinking about? Would you be having us be more aggressive in looking at restructuring, or is this something that we need to work around the edges or add resources to? And I'm not saying you're going to come to a conclusion, but give me some research questions to work off of.
So it would far be us to tell another system what to do, because systems make decisions about grade span arrangement based on space availability, money, the will of the populace. You know, for many years, as you probably remember, the thought of moving grade 5 to a middle school resulted in an uprising.
Yeah.
You know, those things shift over time.
And we did this before COVID, and the world has changed since.
I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you as a former middle school educator. I think there is a value in those students being clustered together with, whether it's 5, 6, 5, 8, 6, 8, whatever it may be, because the growth that happens in those 3 years is so incredible. And to have those children attached to people who can guide them through those 3 years, guide them through that growth, know them, that they don't have to relearn after a year. I'm only talking as a middle school educator.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I see that value. It's a tough enough time as it is. So for me, that would be it. But I've worked in districts that are K-8s, which also gives you the same value. Yes.
Hello, Brookline, yeah.
Yeah, I was silly enough to take an interim sped director for a year in a district that had an 8 through 12 high school. You know, and again, why were the choices made? The choices were made because of space.
Yeah. You just move the angst of the transition to a different point.
Right, exactly. And you know the literature out there, I could find literature either way. When I was proposing moving a 5th grade to a middle school, I could find you literature of yay, I could find you literature nay. There is no real consensus. But like I said, I view it as a former middle school person, knowing those kids and the value of the adults having time to get to know them.
I have always started the conversation with least number of transitions possible. I mean, we just did a study for a district that that has a K2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then a high school. In terms of their buildings. I completely understand why they did that in their work with MSBA in terms of, I think, what they were pushed into. I think the advice that we offered was that meant that there were going to have to be, and it's similar to what we wrote in this report, there are ways you need to think about that differently because you've made that choice. However, everything else being equal, I would always err for the least number of transitions possible.
Yeah, I worked in the K to 4, 5 to 8 system, so that's just another set of issues. But if for whatever reason we were not in a position to go and change the structure, I mean, I hope that we can go forward and get some recommendations of how to unify this, because our intent was to make it one school, two buildings, sort of, when we started this out.
Yes.
And obviously, if kids are moving and the teachers aren't, you're not making that happen. So, yeah, anything, and I hear all the angst from the special ed parents regarding that 5-6 transition. That rings true to me from what I'm hearing from people.
Yeah.
So I'm really open to any thoughts and suggestions that we could have to, is that being sort of a examination point that I think is probably our greatest need right now.
I mean, I believe we recommended in the report to Liz that maybe hiring an inclusion specialist to work with staff.
And across buildings.
Across buildings. That might be helpful. You know, another thing is if you have kids transitioning to 5, 6, and then 6, 7, quite honestly, to transition them successfully, you have to give your teachers time to meet with the sending school and the receiving school. So that impacts your scheduling and the rest of your obligations. But that's a consideration when you talk about systems. What are we setting up that enables the adults to work on this so that students have an easier time?
Yeah.
And one of the recommendations we ended up making in that district I spoke about a minute ago was that they take their team chair structure and straddle them across those buildings, right? Because then a parent has that consistent person that they're working with as they make the transition to that next school, which is only going to be 2 grades, right? So things like that, and there are areas that you can do that in out of a one grade school. And I think it's taken a while. I mean, we had this conversation throughout this process that there have been many iterations of sort of getting there. What we wrote in the report that you're implementing next year seems to be the right kind of support for kids on those teams. So I think you've gotten there on that. To me, it goes back to that last recommendation of how are we communicating that to people? Right? How are we helping them to navigate that so that they become more comfortable coming out of that school that's worked with them for 6 years?
Yeah, I mean, it was a whole nother world when we did this, because what we had then was kids coming out of small elementary schools to the second largest middle school in the state.
Yeah.
And that was not good either.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
How many kids was that?
We were over 1,200. And we built that school for like 950, and we now have 500 and some odd at the Gibbs.
Yeah, we try to be really careful in these kinds of reports around this kind of issue, in that you asked us what we would do or what we would recommend, and I'm happy to tell you. We understand there are lots of different factors in that community I talked about earlier, in your community that drove you here. We just want to make sure that we point out that there are ways of addressing that. Maybe not as good as if they were all in one building together, 3 grades, but there are certainly ways of creating those kinds of assistance for parents, help for educators, around making those transitions as seamless as they can possibly be.
All I can say is you're good educators and experienced leaders, so that if I can have you throwing out some research questions or things for us to think about.
Yeah.
That we're not seeing, or we may be seeing, but we just sort of like to have somebody else voicing. That's appreciative. I'm not asking you what you would do, but
right.
You know, what should we talk about at the next curriculum meeting?
Again, this is from a SPED point of view.
Yeah.
So one of the problems that happens when students transition from grade span to grade span is the sending school will try to protect the child in the IEP, and you sometimes get a fat IEP, for lack of a better description, and it gets to the next level, and the next level says, we can't implement this here. You know, it doesn't meet our schedule, we don't have this level of cert, whatever it may be. So, I mean, one of the places, if you want to do research, is what is happening with those IEPs as students go from 5 to 6. What do those IEPs look like? How contentious are the meetings? Not because parents are being contentious, they're fearful.
Yes.
You know, that will tell you how it's translating, and that you have to do more work around the transitions. And at the other end too, when they go from 6 to 7, what does it look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some data to be looked at in terms of, we hear a lot of people in these interviews say to us that, well, this is one of our inflection points for out-of-district placements. Is that true? We didn't dig into that, but is that true? This is an inflection point for the creation of IEPs. Is that true? What do those IEPs look like? What kinds of things are, because that'll tell you what people are concerned about, what ends up getting written into those IEPs. So that's where I would sort of start and say, have we experienced differences over the years with respect to this transition to the 6th grade school?
Great. So I want to get to Dr. Allison Ampe, and then we're gonna forge ahead. So Dr. Allison Ampe?
Thank you. Paul kind of ended up asking my question. I wanted to be sure that we asked for, basically, assuming we stay as a 6 and then a 7-8 school, how can we improve this setup for our special education students? And though that specifically is what I would love to be hearing in this report. So.
Yeah.
Great, okay.
So, you know, again, one of the complaints that we heard was the teams weren't equal, and in terms of each of them having a special ed teacher. And you've addressed that in your budget. So the distribution of students will be better next year. So students will be able to be placed on teams randomly, or however the principal decides to place them. Everybody will be supported. I don't know what those IEPs will look like, as we just talked about, but you have put in place a lot of supports. You're also going to be in a position next year, I believe, where you upped how many social workers you have across the district. So you've done a lot of work around that. I mean, you know, as we said, a lot of the things that we were coming across, you were taking care of as we were doing the report. There's just some other work that you can do to ease the transitions and to gather some data points about how much anxiety is this transition causing, and how is it playing out.
Yeah, and the other one that I offered, again, it was easier for that district because every one of those buildings was at least 2 grades. Most of them were 2 grades, but they were 2 grades. Yours is 1. Is the idea of, do we have team chairs that move between those buildings, right? Whether it's 6 to the 7-8 or 5 and out of what buildings, right? It becomes more difficult with a 1-grade school. But those kinds of strategies that I'd be thinking about in terms of being better able to alleviate parent and staff from the elementary schools concerns about what's coming next. And Cindy's right. We've seen this in our practice in our own districts where we've worked, sort of the IEP proofing, right, for the next level. Anything we can do to sort of alleviate those kind of concerns, and people who know both schools and can speak eloquently to parents about those concerns certainly is helpful. So I would start there.
Great. So I think, sorry, go ahead. So, and like I want to note that the structure of the middle school wasn't really one of the key questions
That's
that
right.
we were dealing with in this report. So I appreciate the conversations about it. I also have some questions about why it's discussed so much in the report, but that's clearly must be a result of what you're getting from our staff. So we can certainly, follow up on that. But I just want to be clear that that wasn't actually one of the things we went to go and find when we did this.
Right.
So, Mr. Cardin?
Yeah, I was going to make the same point. I mean, that whole issue deserves like a whole separate report with data and lots of other information.
Correct.
So
Yes.
that really wasn't the focus here. There were some results, that's great. They emerged from the interviews, that's great. I did want to point out, though, that, kudos to Ms. Elmer, that she did give a presentation in May to the CPAC about the SLCs. It does explain the through lines much better. I think it glosses over the Gibbs issue a little bit, but you probably talked about that in your verbal presentation. Maybe add a slide about that. But otherwise, maybe it was a result of what you were hearing from them, but it is a better explanation.
It actually came a request from the CPAC as well as this, so it kind of merged nicely.
Great, thanks.
Dr. Homan?
Can I just share what I think some of our bigger takeaways are for some of the questions that we're getting around how do we take some of the feedback and what we're hearing from folks and do something with it. One is to take work that we've now done to out of requests from CPAC and from the report and use that language to make it more public and easy for families to access. Some of the other conversations that have happened at the elementary level in particular is language or resources, tools that can help teams kind of picture or understand what it is if you are suggesting that there's substantially separate or significantly more programming services attached to a student's IEP. One thing that has started to happen this year is teachers visiting programs too, to see and understand kind of what does the program look like, what does it mean for a student to be part of this program, what is the space like, and then that helps contextualize the thinking around conversations surrounding placement. And more of that is a lot of what we're hearing leaders say they want, teachers say they want more opportunities to do because it builds that shared language. The shared language communication piece of this is critical and key. So one of the things that Dr. Ford Walker and I are working on for next year is building in district-wide workshops surrounding the MTSS language in the DCAP that we're going to redo so that we are clear about when we say inclusion, here's what we mean. When we walk into classrooms and we're talking about inclusion, here's some of the things that we might be looking for. It's not an exclusive list, probably, in a short workshop, but we're really committed to giving a district-level message around this next year because it's clear that some shared languages would be helpful given how much turnover we have had. We have about half of the principals have turned over in the past 2 to 3 years. We've talked about retention and need to go triple check all of our numbers across these roles, and we know we have had significant retention or lack of retention in some areas, particularly of special education, and in some areas of general education. So a reaffirmation of the commitment to inclusion, the terms we use in Arlington, what they mean, to what extent they're attached to service delivery grids, or our practices that we look for in classrooms is called for. And I think that's a lot of what this is highlighting and what we're planning around and starting to implement.
Great. All right, thank you so much. Thank you for coming. We've kept you here very late.
It's all right. I hope you're not here too much later.
Not if I can help it. Okey doke. Policy BEDHE, guidelines for public comment. Mr. Schlickman, can you give us the 30-second version on why we're where we are doing a first read and possibly considering voting on this tonight?
I can do a 30-minute version, which is the problem is that the BEDE has 30 minutes where BEDH has 20. So that there's just a typo in the BEDHE where we need to align that with our master policy. Just simply changing number to 30 to 20 to match the other policy. So I'd like to move suspension of the rules to move this policy to a second read.
So moved?
Any
I moved
discussion?
it, so you can second it, yeah.
Discussion? Okey doke. Ms. Exton?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe, who has left us? Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes.
And I'm also yes. That's a 6-0 vote. So now, Mr. Schlickman, would you like to make a motion?
I'd like to move adoption to BEDH-E guidelines for public comment as revised.
Second?
Discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Exton?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes.
And I am also yes. That's a 6-0 vote. Mr. Gorski, budget update, FY25. We are only an hour late. That doesn't mean that you need to give us what we need here.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is following up on our budget subcommittee meeting that we had on Thursday. We went through, I took the subcommittee and I'll take the committee through our year-end process, where we stand currently, and the possibility of needing to tap the sped reserve to close the gap, to close out the fiscal year. We have a year-end tracker. We're going through our typical year-end process where we are receiving invoices, closing out purchase orders. We have about 1.5 million in open purchase orders, primarily in special education and transportation. I still expect dollars to come back to the general fund budget, but we've had some challenges over the last week or so where we had additional expenditures that were added to the bottom line, primarily in facilities. There were items that were added close to about $250,000. There were some items under IT that weren't encumbered. And for both of those are items that can be addressed going forward so that we ensure part of the facilities piece. It's been a challenging year there, staffing wise. I think we can work with them to ensure that we have all utilities and everything else is encumbered. IT, a little bit of a different story. I think they had, by past practice, had invoices that they hadn't encumbered. That's fine if you have someone who's been used to that, like my predecessor. If you're new to the process and you're not expecting invoices to be added to the bottom line, it's a little bit of a different story. We've also had some additional special education charges totaling about $40,000. Those are basically adjustments in purchase orders related to translations. Another one was related to a student who was being, the parent was transporting a student who then, there was an illness related or an operation, and the student needed to go on to transportation. That's also something that we can debrief on with special education, talk about the communication of that, both with the provider and also with the finance office. So that's a long way of saying we're also going through all of our, what you typically go through the year-end process and looking at what are allowable expenses that we can transfer to grants. What are the allowable expenses that we can transfer to our revolving accounts, including the building rental account, the international student tuition account, and others. So we are going through that process. The intent tonight, I know the plan tonight was for school committee to vote on the budget categories. That's the conversation that I had with the superintendent. Last week, we obviously had a conversation at subcommittee that would really be an estimate at this point. And I think the numbers will change. That's why we asked to hold on that vote until July. I would expect we have a payroll that's hitting next week, receiving the invoices, working with SPED, as I mentioned, in transportation. We'll have a much clearer picture of where we are. And my hope, I obviously wanted to have the conversation about the SPED reserve because I don't want people to be caught last minute on it, is that we still will not need to tap into it. But as of today, I think it's likely.
Thank you, Mr. Gorski. Comments from the committee? Mr. Cardin?
Yeah, just, it already is last minute, so thank you for telling us. But I mean, if you really just heard about it in the last week, fine. But I mean, Dr. Allison Ampe specifically asked at the last budget report, you weren't here, it was negative 100,000. We've never shown a negative number in May before. Are we sure we're going to be okay? And we were reassured that we were going to be okay. So ending the year with suddenly needing to tap the special education reserve is obviously not ideal. If we can find any other way, I strongly encourage you to do so. Thanks.
All right, anybody else? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gorski. The next item on the agenda is discussion and possible vote to name spaces at Arlington High School. I will speak to this. I was asked to add this to the agenda at the request of Ms. Gittleson, who is the chair of the Community Relations Subcommittee. They met last week and had a lengthy and robust conversation about some of the recommendations that came from the naming committee. That subcommittee, in conjunction with the facilities subcommittee, had, spoke about a number of these, heard from the superintendent, and the community relations subcommittee has moved 3 naming opportunities forward to the full committee. The vote that we would take tonight would be to send these names along to the Public Memorials Committee for their review. And then they would come back to us. I haven't counted days. They have a certain number of days to come back to us within. I don't know if we would be able to then move forward with these when we meet in the summer or not. But either way, we could do it in September. Ms. Gittleson, did you want to speak to this at all?
No, I don't have anything to add. I mean, I can say the names that we reached. We would like to move forward with naming the Wood Gym, the Black Box Theater, and the Principal's Conference Room after Ms. McDonough, Mr. Rarig, and Mr. Skidmore, respectively.
Great, thank you, Ms. Gittleson. So I'm looking for a motion from someone to, so that we can move forward with these 3 names and send them to the Public Memorials Committee. Mr. Thielman, so moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Schlickman.
I was at the subcommittee meeting, and I thought the discussion was really on point and this very thoughtful outcome.
Great. Anybody else? Great. Roll call vote, Ms. Exton.
Yes.
Mr. Cardin.
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe.
Yes.
Mr. Thielman.
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman.
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson.
Yes.
And I am also yes. That is a 7-0 vote. Ms. Diggins, I will work with you to figure out how we're going to send that down to, I think it ended up going to Florida last time, so we'll get that done. Okay, next is the superintendent's report. Dr. Homan.
Good evening, everyone. This will be a brief report. Just a reminder to everyone, in case you weren't aware, that our last day of school is Monday, June 23rd. We have 2 more full days. On June 23rd, we have an early dismissal at 11:30 for everyone. It has been a very musical and celebratory end to the year. We had String Fest this past weekend and celebrated over 1,000 student musicians on the lawn, the field at the upper parking lot of OMS. It was a wonderful evening, and we were delighted with a lot of music from Star Wars and other galactical shows and movies and stuff. It was a lot of fun. And we also had our bejazzled performances, as students mentioned, celebrating our AHS jazz musicians and alumni present as well. We'd like to say congratulations to our OMS National History Day competitors who went to nationals. We had a lot of students receive honorable mentions, and one competitor's entry, Yushin Yu, who won 3rd place in the junior individual website category in the entire nation, which is pretty fantastic. The title of the website that that student had developed is called Defining Family, the Legal Battle for LGBT Rights in Rashi versus Stahl. And we're very excited for them and that achievement. It's a big deal. We haven't had students place often at the national competition, so congratulations to them. Congratulations also to Arlington High School's Michael Sandler, who is the psychology teacher at Arlington High School. He was named the recipient of the 2025 American Psychological Association Charles Blair Brooker Excellence in Teaching Award. We learned about that recently, and I have a press release that I'll be sure to send out to everybody shortly as well. But congratulations to Mr. Sandler. I also wanted to share that we have received earmark allocations thanks to the advocacy of some of our state legislators who reached out as budgets were being finalized this spring. APS got earmark allocations in the amount of $100,000 for the Thompson elevator, which is supplementing funds that probably wouldn't quite have replaced that elevator. And so that's a huge help to the town as well as the facilities department, some of the work that we've done to increase accessibility in the capital funds. We will also be receiving $50,000 for AV and technology upgrades, with a lot of gratitude to our state legislators for their advocacy and their help securing some of that funding. I also want to welcome some new APS leaders. Jennifer Lamberts will be joining us as the Gibbs AP .5 coordinator .5. And she comes with a lot of expertise in special education and as well as a program administrator and leader of a specialized program in Boston Public Schools. Amanda Donahue will join us as a high school dean. We've announced that before, as well as Kevin Casey, who will be the new OMS principal. Elizabeth Rollins will be the new OMS special education coordinator, rounding out that team alongside Mr. Casey, and Adam Goodstone will be the Stratton assistant principal. Apologies, I listed Mr. Casey twice. And then your enrollments are included in your materials. I want to note a couple of adjustments to what I've included there. I thought it would be valuable for you to be able to see both all of the kindergarten numbers that have come in that could potentially become enrollments. So that's the potential categories over here, right here, this one and this one. So this is total. And then the K average potential is the potential average class size. And then the approved are the ones that are final. So it's right at this time of year, we have a lot that are sort of pending and going through the process, and we're still getting paperwork in. But it's sometimes useful to look at both sets of numbers. So those are now included in the projection spreadsheet. I also did a little bit of calibration to make sure apples were being compared to apples in all of the data across all of the years. And in the K registrations by date. So while we did have a big sort of rate jump this year in that first month of K registrations, I put this up against total submitted. So I had been using approved at certain dates and submitted at other dates. So when we went through and did the approved versus potential numbers for the spreadsheet, I also adjusted that for K registrations by date. So we're trending a little lower than last year around this time, and some of the other previous years around this time. That rate picked up last year. So if we continue to follow that curve, we can expect that it will maybe catch up with it, but might be a little bit lower than last year's curve. So we'll keep track of that and keep an eye on it. And then I also added a graph that is total submitted new registrations by date. So you can look at how many new to the district folks across all of the grades we've received in previous years and we've received so far this year. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Dr. Holman? Can you bring me back to Kirsty and Laura? Thank you. No, don't apologize. Seeing none. Great, thank you for that report. We are now arrived at the consent agenda. All items listed with an asterisk are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the committee so requests, in which event the item will be considered in its normal sequence. Warrant number 25297 in the amount of $769,126.46 dated June 10th, 2025. School committee draft meeting minutes, June 4th, 2025.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, Ms. Exton.
Yes.
Mr. Cardin.
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe.
Yes.
Mr. Thielman.
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman.
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson.
Yes.
And I am also yes. That is a 7-0 vote. That brings us to subcommittee liaison reports and announcements. Budget, Dr. Allison Ampe.
Okay. We met on the 12th. You can read all about it in the minutes, which were just approved and sent to Ms. Diggins. I can't help you because my computer died in the middle, and that's why I'm now on my iPad.
Thank you.
We
Community,
will be, I think we will be scheduling a meeting before our next school committee meeting to look at what's happening with the end of the year financing.
great, thank you. Ms. Gittleson, Community Relations.
We will be posting soon for applications for this one to be one of the school committee nominees for the Human Rights Commission, and we'll meet about that once we have applicants.
CIA, Ms. Exton.
No report.
Mr. Thielman, Facilities.
We met last week, and we are going to receive a more updated version of the Tech and Space Plan this summer to review and bring to the committee in the fall.
Great. And I'd like to note Mr. Thielman had all of his minutes prepared and approved. Policy, Mr.
Well,
Schlickman.
Ms. Diggins, I responded respectfully to her request.
You sure did. Mr. Schlickman, Policy.
Well, we met at 6:31 PM and approved 2 sets of minutes. Mr. Carden also sent along the list of things that we were working on before the transition, so we'll be scheduling a meeting.
Arlington High School Building Committee, Mr. Thielman.
We are moving along well. You can go back outside and, well, you can't really walk out there and see anything, but if you're on the bike path or you're up in the building, you can see all the progress being made.
I'm told they're closing this door.
Liaison reports. Announcements. So future agenda items, I am going to say we need, not only do we need future agenda items, we need a whole future agenda and a meeting. So the dates that have been proposed, so this would be a fully remote meeting. We're not coming here. So we would do this only on Zoom. The dates that were sort of floated were the 15th, 16th, or 17th of July. We do need to meet before July 21st, but it sounds like it would be beneficial to not meet too early in July.
Yes, because of vacation and also getting handbooks ready to go.
So are there people for whom the 15th, 16th, and 17th are like right in a vacation week that would preclude them entirely? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Does anybody have a preference for the 15th, 16th, or 17th? Mr. Schlickman has a preference, okey doke.
Permanent Town Building is meeting on the 15th, so.
Okey doke.
Yeah.
People have a preference for the 16th versus the 17th. Ms.
I have
Gibson.
preference for the 16th.
Okey doke, good.
I actually also have.
Fantastic, even better. Dr. Allison Amby.
I have a preference for the 15th or the 17th. I may have problems if it's the 16th, depending on how long it lasts.
Okay, what would be a time that would give you an hour? I don't anticipate, we could need an hour, actually.
My problem is it's dealing with something that I don't know right now, the timing and how long I have to drive and things like that. So that.
Mr. Schlickman, when is PTBC on the 15th?
I believe it's at 7 o'clock. So I could do earlier.
Could we do 6?
Could we do 6? Yeah, sure.
I could make 6 on the 15th, but I don't want to hold up the whole thing. I'm in a. I could do earlier in the day, but maybe have Ms. Diggins send around something with some options and we can.
Sure.
That might be the best way to do it.
Okey doke.
With all the different, like, many hours option.
Yeah.
You can come and tell what's available.
Okay, that sounds fine. So Ms. Diggins, if you can give us some hours in the,
In that window, yeah.
in that window. So does anybody have a full conflict on the 15th, 16th, or 17th? You do.
I'm at a meeting in another part of the United States, but I'm going to join from
Okay.
the meeting, but
It needs to be later in the day.
It needs to
ideally.
be when I see that schedule, I'll put in my hours.
Perfect. Okay.
But
All
I
right.
don't want to be the one to gum up the whole thing.
No, that's fine. Okay, so let's put out dates on the 15th, 16th, and 17th and see what we get. Perfect. Okay. Great, thank you. Motion to adjourn.
No, just.
Oh, no, we got more things. Uh-oh, sorry.
Announcements or future agenda items.
Oh, okay. Well, I
yeah.
already did announcements, so the time for that may have passed, but we can
Future
go back.
agenda items.
Sure. That would
Okay.
be fine.
So as we're talking about naming things, I just received word about a person named Georgiana Tupper Peatfield. Anybody ever heard of her? Well, it seems that she taught in Arlington at the Russell School until she married Dr. Peatfield, a local dentist, in November 1888. What makes her really interesting to us is in 1896, she became the first woman to be elected to the Arlington School Committee. And she actually topped the ticket. And she's got a very interesting bio and obituary because unfortunately she passed away of cancer in 1901 after serving only 4 years on the committee. So I mentioned this, and I'll send out the obituary to everybody. I'm not going to spend the time to read it, but I think that as we're talking about naming things and honoring people, as I've gone through the old history, all the names that seem to be in the advocate from that year who were men have stuff named after them. But nobody I've talked to knows about Georgiana Tupper Peatfield. So I'd sort of like to get a little equity here and honor the first woman school committee member in Arlington who seems to have been a very extraordinary person.
All right. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anybody else on announcements or future agenda items? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Ms. Exton?
Yes.
Mr. Cardin?
Yes.
Dr. Allison Ampe?
Yes.
Mr. Thielman?
Yes.
Mr. Schlickman?
Yes.
Ms. Gittleson?
Yes.
I am also yes. That is a 7-0 vote. Have a good night and a good year. Good night, good year.